When a desperate CEO knocked on a struggling carpenter's door at midnight with an impossible demand, "Marry me by tomorrow or I lose everything," neither of them knew this fake marriage would become the most real thing in their lives. This is the story of Daniel Brooks, a single father one bill away from ruin, and Claire Monroe, a woman who built an empire but couldn't save herself. What starts as a cold business transaction becomes something far more dangerous when the lies they tell the world start feeling like truth. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. The rain came down in sheets that October night, turning the gravel driveway into a river of mud and memory. Daniel Brooks stood at his kitchen sink, hands submerged in dishwater that had gone cold 20 minutes ago, staring through the window at nothing in particular. The fluorescent light above flickered, had been flickering for 3 weeks now, casting irregular shadows across the stack of bills spread out on the scratched formica table behind him. Red numbers, every single one of them. The mortgage payment was due in 6 days. The electric company had sent their final notice. Printed on pink paper like that somehow made the threat more gentle. His daughter Emma's school was requesting payment for the field trip she'd been talking about for months, her 7-year-old voice bright with anticipation every time she mentioned the science museum. Daniel pulled his hands from the water, dried them on a towel that had seen better years, and turned to face the evidence of his failure. 42 years old, widowed for 3 years, running a carpentry business that was barely breaking even, a father who was doing his best and watching it not be enough. The Brooks family carpentry shop had been his father's dream, passed down like a legacy that was supposed to mean something. Daniel had poured everything into keeping it alive, his time, his energy, every dollar that wasn't earmarked for keeping the lights on and food in Emma's stomach. He was good at the work. His hands knew wood the way some men knew numbers or words. He could look at a piece of oak and see the table hidden inside it, could transform raw materials into something beautiful and functional. But beautiful didn't pay the bills when half the town was hiring the big contractors from the city, when everyone wanted cheap and fast instead of quality and craftsmanship. He picked up the envelope from Riverside Bank, the one he'd been avoiding for 2 days. Inside was a letter that used polite language to deliver an impolite message. Bring the account current within 30 days or face foreclosure proceedings. Foreclosure. The word tasted like ash. This house, barely 1,500 square feet of aging wood and stubborn plumbing, was all Emma had ever known. Her mother had died in the bedroom upstairs. Her height marks were penciled on the doorframe between the kitchen and the living room, a chronicle of growth that started when she was 2 and couldn't quite reach the first line. Her laugh lived in these walls, and Daniel was going to lose it. He heard the creak of floorboards above his head, Emma shifting in her sleep. She'd gone to bed 3 hours ago, after he'd read her 2 chapters of the book they were working through together. She'd asked him if they could get pizza tomorrow night, the way they used to before Mom died, when Friday nights meant something other than another day closer to financial collapse. He'd told her maybe. The lie had felt like swallowing glass. Daniel moved to the coffee maker, started a pot he didn't really want but needed anyway. The clock on the microwave read 11:47 p.m. In 13 minutes, it would be Friday. In 13 minutes, he'd be 1 day closer to the mortgage deadline with no solution in sight. He'd applied for 3 loans in the past month. Denied. 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 His credit was shot, his collateral was the house itself, and banks didn't bet on desperate men who smelled like sawdust and made their living with their hands. The coffee began to percolate, filling the kitchen with a smell that reminded him of early mornings with Sarah, back when life felt like it had momentum instead of just weight. She'd been the business mind, handling the invoices and the client relationships while he focused on the craft. When cancer took her, it took half the business with it, the half that knew how to turn good work into sustainable income. Daniel was still staring at the coffee maker when he heard the sound. 3 knocks. Not loud, not tentative, precise and controlled, like someone who'd practiced keeping their desperation hidden. He froze, every instinct suddenly alert. Nobody knocked on doors at midnight unless something was wrong. His mind ran through possibilities: accident, emergency, police. None of them good. The knocks came again. Same rhythm, same controlled force. Daniel crossed the kitchen, moved through the small living room cluttered with Emma's art supplies and library books, and stopped at the front door. Through the frosted glass panel, he could make out a silhouette. Female. Alone. Not the posture of someone in immediate danger, but not relaxed either. He flipped on the porch light and opened the door. For a moment, Daniel couldn't process what he was seeing. His brain struggled to reconcile the woman standing on his porch with the context of midnight rain and a house slowly drowning in debt. Claire Monroe. He knew her face the way anyone in a small business knows the face of someone who changed their trajectory, even temporarily. 6 months ago, she'd hired Brooks Family Carpentry to custom build the conference table for Monroe Industries' new headquarters. It had been the biggest contract he'd landed in 2 years, $12,000 for a table that had taken him 3 weeks to perfect. Solid walnut, hand-finished, inlaid with subtle brass details. She'd barely looked at him during the installation, communicating mostly through her assistant, but she'd paid on time and in full. Now she stood on his porch at midnight, and she looked nothing like the woman he remembered. Her hair was dark with rain, pulled back in a hasty ponytail that was coming undone. She wore jeans, expensive ones, but still jeans, and a black jacket that was soaked through. A leather duffel bag hung from her shoulder, the kind of bag someone packs when they have 10 minutes and shaking hands. But it was her eyes that stopped him. He'd seen those eyes before, in the mirror, after Sarah's funeral. The look of someone who'd run out of options and was standing at the edge of something they couldn't see the bottom of. "Mr. Brooks," she said. Her voice was steady, but he could hear the hairline fractures in it. "I apologize for the hour. I need to speak with you. It's urgent." Daniel glanced past her, looking for a car. A black Mercedes sat in his driveway, one door still open, interior light casting a pale glow onto the wet gravel. "Miss Monroe?" he said slowly. "It's almost midnight. I know what time it is." She shifted the bag on her shoulder. Rain dripped from her jacket onto his worn welcome mat. "Please, 5 minutes of your time. I'll explain everything." Every reasonable instinct told him to politely decline, to cite the late hour and his daughter sleeping upstairs, to close the door on whatever chaos had brought a CEO to a carpenter's house after midnight. But Daniel had spent 3 years learning to read desperation, and he recognized the signature. He stepped aside. Claire Monroe entered his home like someone crossing a border they couldn't go back through. She set her bag down carefully, precisely, then turned to face him with the kind of composure that only came from years of practice hiding everything that mattered. "Thank you," she said. Daniel closed the door, suddenly aware of how his house must look to someone like her. The furniture was old but clean, the carpet showed its age. Emma's drawings covered the refrigerator, held up by magnets from places they'd never actually visited. The stack of bills on the kitchen table might as well have been a neon sign advertising his failure. "Can I get you something?" he asked, defaulting to the hospitality Sarah had drilled into him. "Coffee's fresh." "No, thank you." Claire's eyes moved around the room, not judging, just cataloging. When they landed on the bills, she looked away quickly. "I'll get straight to the point. I need your help with something that will sound insane." Daniel waited. "I need a husband," Claire said, "by tomorrow." The words hung in the air between them like something physical. Daniel's first thought was that he'd misheard her. His second thought was that this was some kind of elaborate joke, though Claire Monroe's expression suggested she'd forgotten how to joke somewhere around the third hostile takeover attempt. "I'm sorry," he said carefully. "I don't think I understand." Claire took a breath, and something in her posture shifted. The CEO dissolved slightly, revealing the woman underneath, scared, angry, and running out of time. "My father died 8 months ago," she said. "He left me Monroe Industries in trust, but there's a clause, a morality clause specifically. It states that if I'm unmarried by my 35th birthday, controlling interest passes to my stepbrother, Richard Monroe. My birthday is tomorrow at 12:01 a.m. Daniel's mind was racing, trying to find the connection between this information and him standing in his living room in sweatpants and a t-shirt that had holes in it. "That's," he started. "Archaic? Sexist? Yes." Claire's jaw tightened. "My father believed in traditional values. He remarried when I was 12 to a woman who already had a son my age. Richard and I were raised as siblings, but we've been competing for my father's approval since the day we met. When Dad got sick, he changed the trust. I think he believed I needed stability, or maybe he just wanted to control me from beyond the grave. Either way, the clause is legal, ironically bulletproof. I've had 4 different law firms review it. Why me? The question came out before Daniel could think better of it. Claire met his eyes directly. Because 6 months ago, you built me a conference table. You were on time, under budget, and the quality exceeded expectations. Your background check came back clean. No criminal record, no scandals, no complications. You have a daughter, which means you understand responsibility. You run your own business, which means you're not desperate enough to make demands that would complicate things. She paused, then added with brutal honesty. And because I need someone who won't try to take advantage of the situation. Someone who doesn't move in the same circles I do. Someone Richard won't see coming. Daniel felt something cold settle in his stomach. You want me to marry you? Tomorrow. For appearances. For survival. Claire's hands clenched at her sides. If Richard takes control, he'll dismantle everything my father built. He'll sell off divisions for short-term profit, fire hundreds of people, and run the company into the ground within 5 years. I've spent the last 8 months preparing for this, trying every legal angle to break or extend the clause. Nothing worked. This is the only option left. The coffee maker beeped in the kitchen, startling them both. Daniel walked to it automatically, poured himself a cup he didn't want, used the motion to buy himself time to think. Marriage. To a woman he'd met twice. To solve a problem that had nothing to do with him. It was insane. But the stack of bills on his table was real. The foreclosure notice was real. Emma's field trip money, the flickering light, the knowledge that he was 6 days from losing everything, all real. What would this arrangement entail, so he heard himself ask. Claire followed him into the kitchen, maintaining the careful distance of someone used to negotiating. A legal marriage, properly executed and documented. You would need to appear credible as my husband to the board of directors and my father's attorneys. After a suitable period, 6 months, a year, we'd divorce quietly. You'd sign a prenuptial agreement stating that you're entitled to nothing from my personal assets. Then what do I get out of it? Daniel's voice was flat. What do you need? The question hit harder than she probably intended. Daniel looked at the bills again, thought about Emma upstairs, thought about the business his father had built, and trusted him to carry forward. I need to not lose my house, he said quietly. I need my business to survive. I need my daughter to have the stability she deserves. Claire nodded slowly. I can help with that, but not through direct payment. That would raise questions, create a paper trail that Richard could use against us. It has to look legitimate. So how? I hire Brooks Family Carpentry for a major renovation project, Claire said, her mind clearly already working through the logistics. My house needs extensive work, and it actually does. I'm not inventing this. I'll pay market rate, maybe slightly above. Multiple contracts over the next year. Enough to stabilize your business and clear your immediate debts. It was elegant, Daniel had to admit. Business transactions instead of bribes. Work for money, the way the world was supposed to function. What about Emma? He asked. My daughter. She's 7. She doesn't need to be part of whatever performance we're selling. Agreed. The marriage can be private initially. We'll need to appear together at certain events, but I won't insert myself into your daughter's life unless absolutely necessary. Children complicate things. The way she said it, clinical, distant, reminded Daniel that he was talking to a woman who'd probably been trained since birth to see relationships as transactions. I need to think about this, he said. You have... Claire checked her watch, a gesture so automatic it was almost unconscious. 7 hours. The courthouse opens at 9 a.m. We need to be first in line with all documentation completed. That's not enough time. It's the time we have. Claire's composure cracked slightly. Please understand, Mr. Brooks. I'm not here because I enjoy asking strangers to upend their lives for my benefit. I'm here because I'm out of options. If I could solve this any other way, I would have. But I've spent 8 months fighting a dead man's will, and I'm about to lose everything I've worked for because I'm not married to someone approved by a board of men who think women belong in the home, not the boardroom. Daniel heard the rage underneath her words, carefully controlled but burning hot. He recognized it because he'd felt it himself, the anger that came from doing everything right and still losing. "If I agree," he said slowly, "we do this honestly. No lies beyond what's absolutely necessary. No shortcuts that could come back to hurt Emma or my business. Everything documented. Everything clean." "Yes. And when it's over, we walk away clean too. No complications, no lingering connections. You live your life, I live mine." Something flickered across Claire's face. Relief, maybe, or sadness. Hard to tell. "That's the agreement," she confirmed. Daniel set his coffee cup down on the counter. The bills on the table seemed to glow in the fluorescent light. Upstairs, Emma slept peacefully, unaware that her father was standing at a crossroads that could save them or destroy them. He thought about Sarah, about what she would say if she were here. She'd probably tell him he was insane, that this was too risky, that there had to be another way. But Sarah wasn't here, and there wasn't another way. Not one he could see. "If we're going to do this," Daniel said, "we need to make it convincing. A marriage that appears overnight looks suspicious. We need a story, background, details that can survive scrutiny." Claire's shoulders dropped slightly, tension releasing. She'd heard his answer in the shift of his language from if to we. "What do you suggest?" Daniel pulled out a chair, sat down at the kitchen table, and gestured for her to do the same. Claire sat across from him, and in that moment, they looked less like a CEO and a carpenter, and more like two people planning a campaign they couldn't afford to lose. "How did we meet?" he asked. "You built my conference table." "No, that's too recent, too transactional. We need something with more history." Daniel's mind was working now, the same way it did when he planned a complex build. "You hired me for a smaller project first, maybe built-in bookshelves for your home office, 2 years ago. We talked during the installation. Discovered we both lost parents young, your mother when you were a child, my father when I was in my 20s. Claire leaned forward slightly. "We connected over shared loss. Started as professional acquaintance, became friendship. You were still grieving your wife, I was focused on the company. Neither of us was looking for a relationship. But it developed slowly. Coffee after project completions, phone calls that ran longer than they should have. You met Emma at the workshop when you stopped by to approve designs." "Emma liked me," Claire said, and there was something almost wistful in her voice. "Kids are good judges of character. If she trusted me, you knew I was worth taking seriously." They built the fiction together like they were laying foundation stones. The first real conversation over coffee at the diner on Mason Street. The night Daniel called her after Emma had a nightmare, and Claire stayed on the phone for 2 hours talking about nothing important, just being there. The gradual realization that they understood each other in ways that went beyond words. "We kept it private," Daniel said. "You because of business complications. Richard would have used a relationship against you. Me because I wasn't ready to introduce someone new into Emma's life. Until a month ago, when things got serious enough that we couldn't hide it anymore. We told Emma together. She was nervous at first, but you were patient. Didn't try to replace her mother. Just showed up, consistently." Claire nodded, and Daniel saw her committing every detail to memory. This woman didn't do anything by half measures. They talked for 2 more hours, building their false history with the care of architects designing a structure that had to hold weight. They established favorite restaurants, inside jokes, habits, and quirks that couples developed over time. Claire mentioned that she always read before bed, mysteries mostly. Daniel admitted he was terrible at returning phone calls but would always text back immediately. Small truths embedded in the larger lie, making it real enough to believe. At 2 a.m., Claire finally stood. "I should go. We both need sleep before tomorrow." "Wait." Daniel stood as well. "If we're doing this, if we're selling this to your board and your stepbrother, it can't look like we rushed. We need to look like a couple who's been together long enough that marriage makes sense." "What are you suggesting?" Daniel took a breath, knowing what he was about to say would cross a line they couldn't uncross. "You should stay here tonight. Move in, actually. If anyone checks, and Richard will check, they'll find evidence that we've been living together. Your car in my driveway. Your things in my house. It needs to look established." Claire stared at him. "You're asking me to move in tonight, right now. I'm saying if we're going to do this, we can't do it halfway. Halfway gets us both destroyed. The silence stretched between them. Daniel could hear the rain on the roof, the hum of the refrigerator, his own heartbeat in his ears. "The spare bedroom," Claire said finally. "I'll take the spare bedroom. It's small, mostly storage right now. I'll manage." They moved with the efficiency of people who'd made a decision and refused to second-guess it. Daniel cleared out the spare room, a glorified closet with a twin bed and boxes of Sarah's things he hadn't been able to sort through yet. Claire brought in her duffel bag, hung a few items in the tiny closet, placed toiletries in the bathroom they'd now share. It should have felt intrusive, having a stranger in his space. Instead, it felt like something else, like crossing into territory that was dangerous and necessary in equal measure. By 3 a.m., they were sitting back at the kitchen table with coffee and laptops. Claire was reviewing the trust documents, highlighting relevant sections. Daniel was making a list of everything they'd need for the courthouse: birth certificates, IDs, the marriage license application he'd have to fill out in the morning. "There's something else," Claire said without looking up from her screen. "The prenuptial agreement. I'll have my attorney draft something tonight, but you should have a lawyer review it before you sign." "I don't have a lawyer." "Then I'll pay for one to review it. This has to be fair, Daniel. I'm asking you to take a significant risk. You should understand exactly what you're signing." The use of his first name startled him. She'd been careful to maintain formality until now. "Claire," he said, testing her name in return. "Why did you really come here? There are plenty of men you could have asked, men in your social circle who would jump at the chance to marry you, even temporarily." She closed her laptop, met his eyes. "Because those men would see this as an opportunity, a chance to gain leverage, make demands, position themselves for advantage. They'd marry me and immediately start planning how to maximize their benefit from the arrangement." "And you think I won't?" "I think you're desperate enough to say yes, but decent enough not to exploit the situation." Claire's voice softened slightly. "I watched you install that conference table. You worked alone because you didn't trust anyone else to meet your standards. You double-checked every measurement, adjusted the leveling 3 times until it was perfect. You treated a piece of furniture like it mattered. That kind of integrity is rare." Daniel didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. They worked in companionable silence until Claire's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and her expression hardened. "Richard," she said, "texting to remind me that time is running out. He thinks I'm panicking right now." "Are you?" Claire smiled, and it was sharp enough to cut. "I'm past panic. Panic is what you feel when you still think you might lose. I've already decided I'm going to win. Now it's just execution." Daniel recognized that look. It was the same expression Sarah used to get when she was fighting the cancer, the moment she stopped being afraid and started being angry. Anger, Sarah had taught him, was sometimes the only thing that kept you moving forward. At 4:30 a.m., Emma's voice called out from upstairs, "Dad?" Daniel's heart stopped. He'd forgotten about Emma waking from nightmares sometimes, needing reassurance. "Go," Claire said immediately. "I'll stay down here." Daniel climbed the stairs quickly, found Emma sitting up in bed, her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched against her chest. "Hey, baby," he said softly, sitting on the edge of her bed. "Bad dream?" Emma nodded, her eyes still heavy with sleep. "The storm woke me up. I thought I heard voices." "Just me. I couldn't sleep, so I was working on some paperwork." "Is everything okay, Dad?" The question gutted him. 7 years old, and she already knew to ask that question, already understood that her father sometimes stayed up late worrying about things he couldn't control. "Everything's going to be fine," Daniel said, smoothing her hair back. "I promise." He stayed with her until she fell back asleep, then returned downstairs to find Claire standing by the window, looking out at the rain. "She okay?" Claire asked. "Yeah, sometimes the storms bother her. My mother used to tell me that storms were just the sky rearranging itself, making room for something better. Did that help?" "Not really, but it was nice that she tried." They stood there in the pre-dawn darkness, 2 strangers who'd agreed to become family overnight, and Daniel felt the weight of what they were about to do settle over him like a physical thing. "We should try to sleep," he said. "Few hours at least." Claire nodded. "Daniel?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for saying yes. for not asking for more than what's fair, for treating this seriously. I haven't done anything yet. You opened your door at midnight. You listened. You're helping me when you have every reason to focus only on your own problems. That's more than you think. She disappeared into the spare room, closing the door softly behind her. Daniel stood in his kitchen, their kitchen now, technically, and wondered what the hell he'd just agreed to. At 7:00 a.m., his alarm went off. He'd slept maybe 90 minutes, dreams fragmenting into anxiety about everything that could go wrong. But when he came downstairs, he found Claire already awake, dressed in fresh clothes from her duffel, her hair pulled back efficiently. She'd made coffee, cleaned up their midnight work session, and was reviewing documents with the focus of someone preparing for battle. "Morning," she said. "I've confirmed the courthouse opens at 9. We should arrive at 8:45 to be first in line." "What about the prenup?" "My attorney sent a draft at 6 a.m. I forwarded it to you. I've also arranged for John Martinez, he's a family law attorney, to call you at 8 to review it. He's good, he's discreet, and he'll tell you if anything in the agreement is unfair." Daniel poured coffee, impressed despite himself. "You don't waste time." "Can't afford to." At 8:00 a.m. exactly, his phone rang. John Martinez was professional, thorough, and clearly accustomed to unusual situations. He walked Daniel through the prenuptial agreement clause by clause, explaining what each section meant in practical terms. "Bottom line," Martinez said, "this is one of the fairest prenups I've reviewed. You're waiving claim to her personal assets and company holdings, but you retain full rights to your business, property, and any income you generate. If the marriage ends, you walk away with what you came in with. No alimony either direction, no division of property, clean separation." "What about debts incurred during the marriage?" "Separately maintained. Your debts are yours, hers are hers. The only joint responsibility would be if you intentionally created joint debt, which I assume you won't." "What's the catch?" "There isn't one, Ms. Monroe is protecting her assets, but she's not trying to trap you or take advantage. If anything, she's being more generous than she needs to be." After the call, Daniel found Claire in the living room, looking at Emma's drawings on the refrigerator. "Your attorney says it's fair," he told her. "It is fair. I'm not trying to cheat you, Daniel. I'm trying to survive." At 8:30 a.m., Emma woke up. Daniel heard her footsteps on the stairs, and panic flooded through him. He and Claire hadn't discussed what to tell Emma, how to explain a stranger in their house. But Claire moved smoothly, stepped into the kitchen, out of immediate sight. Emma appeared, rubbing her eyes. "Morning, Dad." "Morning, sweetheart. Want pancakes? Can we have the chocolate chip ones?" "Absolutely." He made breakfast while Emma chattered about school, about her friend Madison's birthday party next week, about the science museum trip she was hoping for. Normal morning conversation that felt surreal against the backdrop of everything else happening. When Emma left to get dressed for school, Daniel found Claire in the spare room, giving them space. "I'll drop Emma at school," he said. "Then we go to the courthouse." "Okay. Claire?" "She can't know about this. Not yet. Not until we figure out how to explain it in a way that won't hurt her." "Understood." He drove Emma to school, watched her run toward the building with her backpack bouncing, and felt guilt settle in his chest like a stone. He was doing this for her, to protect their home and their future. But he was also lying to her, and that felt like betrayal. When he returned home, Claire was waiting by her Mercedes, documents folder in hand. "Ready?" she asked. Daniel locked his house, their house, and climbed into the passenger seat of her expensive car. They drove to the courthouse in silence, the weight of what they were about to do making conversation impossible. But when they were 2 blocks away, Claire's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, and her face went white. "It's Richard," she said. Then she answered, putting it on speaker. "Claire," Richard Monroe's voice was smooth, satisfied. "Just calling to wish you a happy birthday, Eve. I hope you're prepared for tomorrow's transition. Don't count your victories before they're won, Richard." "Oh, I'm counting. I've already prepared the paperwork for the board meeting. Smooth transition, minimal disruption. Very professional. We'll see about that. Claire, we both know there's no way out of this, unless you've managed to find a husband in the last," he paused dramatically, 12 hours, which, let's be honest, would be desperate even for you. Claire's hand tightened on the steering wheel. Goodbye, Richard. She ended the call and they sat at a red light, both breathing harder than they should be. He doesn't know, Daniel said. He thinks he's already won. The light turned green. Claire drove the last 2 blocks, parked in the courthouse lot, and turned off the engine. This is it, she said. Last chance to back out. Daniel thought about Emma, about his house, about Sarah's memory living in those walls, about the business his father had built and trusted him to carry forward. Let's go, he said. They walked into the Riverside County Courthouse at 8:47 a.m., first in line at the county clerk's office. They filled out paperwork with hands that didn't shake, presented IDs and birth certificates, answered questions from a clerk who looked too bored to care about the story behind their marriage. At 9:15 a.m., they were directed to wait for the next available officiant. But at 9:20 a.m., Claire's phone rang again. This time, her expression went from calm to furious in seconds. What? Daniel asked. Compliance inspection, she said tightly. Richard triggered a compliance inspection of Monroe Industries, emergency. I'm required to be there immediately or face board sanctions. Can he do that? He just did. Claire stood, pacing in the courthouse hallway. It's going to take hours. They'll go through every file, every transaction, looking for irregularities that don't exist. By the time I'm cleared, the courthouse will be closed. Daniel felt their plan crumbling. So we do it Monday. The trust activates at 12:01 a.m. tomorrow. Monday is too late. They stared at each other, the impossible situation crushing down on them. And then Daniel's mind clicked into the problem-solving mode that had kept his business alive through 3 years of disasters. What if we don't need the courthouse? He said slowly. Claire blinked. What? A marriage license just needs to be signed by an authorized officiant and filed with the county. It doesn't have to happen here. Where else could we? Daniel was already pulling out his phone, scrolling through contacts. Tommy Chen, he's a notary public, licensed to perform marriages in emergency situations. Will he do it tonight? He owes me 3 favors and a rebuilt desk. Let me call him. 10 minutes later, it was arranged. Tommy would meet them at 11 o'clock p.m. at his office above the 24-hour diner on Route 9. Claire had to leave for the compliance inspection. Daniel went home, fed Emma dinner, helped her with homework, read her bedtime stories, the whole time feeling like he was living in 2 realities simultaneously. At 10:30 p.m., Claire texted, "Inspection finally over. On my way." At 10:55 p.m., they met in the parking lot of Rosie's Diner. Tommy Chen was waiting upstairs in his small office, looking tired but curious. "Danny," he said. "This is the emergency?" "This is the emergency." Tommy looked at Claire, then back at Daniel. "You two sure about this?" "We're sure," Claire said firmly. Tommy shrugged. "Your life, man. Let's make it legal." The ceremony took 6 minutes. They stood under fluorescent lights that hummed with electrical interference while Tommy read the standard vows. They repeated words about love and commitment that felt like speaking a language neither of them actually knew. When Tommy asked for rings, Daniel froze. He hadn't thought about rings. But then his hand went to the chain around his neck, the one he always wore under his shirt, Sarah's wedding ring. He'd kept it close since she died, unable to let it go, but unable to look at it either. He pulled it out slowly, unclasped the chain. "Daniel," Claire said quietly, "you don't have to." "Yes, I do." He looked at the simple gold band, worn smooth by years of wear. "If we're doing this, we're doing it right. Sarah would understand." He slid the ring onto Claire's finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her all along. Claire stared at her hand, at the ring that meant something Daniel couldn't articulate. Then she looked up at him, and something in her eyes had changed. "I don't have—" she started. "Doesn't matter," Daniel said. "This is enough." Tommy pronounced them married at 11:07 p.m. They signed the license. Tommy notarized it, stamped it official, and handed them copies. "Congratulations," he said, sounding uncertain about whether that was actually appropriate. In the parking lot, Daniel and Claire stood by their cars, legally married, still strangers in every way that mattered. "I'll file this first thing Monday morning," Claire said, holding her copy of the marriage license like it was a weapon. "Get it on record before Richard can react." "Okay." Daniel. She touched the ring on her finger unconsciously. Thank you. For this. For all of it. Thank you for the contracts. For helping me keep my house. It should have felt transactional. Instead, it felt like something else entirely. Claire drove away in her Mercedes. Daniel stood in the parking lot of a diner, watching her taillights disappear, and wondered what he'd just done. When he got home, Emma was still asleep. The bills were still on the table. Everything looked the same. But Daniel Brooks, Carpenter's single father, man who'd been drowning 6 hours ago, was now married to one of the most powerful women in the state. And somehow, that was the least crazy thing about his day. The morning after their midnight wedding, Daniel woke to sunlight streaming through his bedroom window and the disorienting realization that he was now a married man. His hand went automatically to his neck, feeling for the chain that was no longer there. The absence of Sarah's ring, a physical ache. He'd given it to Claire, to his wife. The thought felt surreal, even as he formed it. Emma was already awake, singing something off-key in her bedroom. Daniel pulled himself together, splashed water on his face, and went downstairs to find Claire sitting at his kitchen table with her laptop open and 3 different phones arranged in front of her like weapons. She looked up when he entered. Good morning. Morning, Daniel said, moving toward the coffee maker on autopilot. You sleep at all? A few hours. I filed the marriage license electronically at 6 a.m. It's officially on record. She paused, her fingers hovering over her keyboard. Richard called me 17 times between midnight and 5 a.m. I didn't answer. What's he going to do when he finds out? Lose his mind, probably, then try to prove the marriage is fraudulent. Claire's expression was calm, but Daniel could see the tension in her shoulders. Which is why we need to make sure every detail is airtight. Emma's footsteps thundered down the stairs. Daniel and Claire exchanged a quick glance, and Claire smoothly closed her laptop, shifting into a posture that looked less like a CEO preparing for war and more like someone who had every right to be drinking coffee in this kitchen. Dad, can we have waffles? Emma appeared in the doorway, then stopped short when she saw Claire. Oh, hi. Daniel's heart hammered. They hadn't prepared for this, hadn't planned what to say, but Claire smiled and it looked almost natural. Hi, Emma. I'm Claire. Your dad and I are old friends. I hope it's okay that I stopped by early. Emma studied Claire with the unfiltered assessment of a 7-year-old. You're the lady from the table. That's right. I hired your dad to build furniture for my office. Dad makes really good furniture. He made my bookshelf and it has a secret compartment. He told me about that. The hidden drawer behind the middle shelf, right? Emma's eyes widened. He told you about the secret compartment? Claire glanced at Daniel, who was standing frozen by the coffee maker, then back at Emma. We've known each other for a while. We talk about lots of things. It was a careful answer, true but incomplete. Emma seemed to accept it, already moving on to more important matters. Are you staying for breakfast? I should probably go, Claire said, but Daniel surprised himself by interrupting. You could stay, if you want. Emma, why don't you go get dressed for school? I'll make those waffles. After Emma bounded back upstairs, Claire looked at him questioningly. If we're supposed to have been together for a while, Daniel said quietly, it makes sense that you'd be here sometimes. Better she gets used to seeing you around gradually than having it sprung on her all at once. I don't want to confuse her. I don't either, but confused is better than shocked. Daniel pulled out the waffle iron. Besides, you need to eat. When's the last time you had a real meal? Claire couldn't seem to answer that question, which was answer enough. They ate breakfast together, the 3 of them, and it felt strange and domestic and terrifying. Emma chattered about her friend Madison's upcoming birthday party, about the spelling test she was nervous about whether astronauts could bring pets to space. Claire listened with what appeared to be genuine interest, asking follow-up questions that made Emma light up. Daniel watched them and felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't supposed to be real. It was a transaction, a business arrangement with a fixed end date. But sitting at his scratched kitchen table watching Claire compliment Emma's drawing of a cat in a spacesuit felt dangerously close to something he'd stopped believing in 3 years ago. After he dropped Emma at school, he returned home to find Claire still there, back at her laptop, her expression grim. Richard knows, she said without preamble. He just sent a message to the entire board. He's calling an emergency meeting for Monday morning to contest the marriage. On what grounds? That it's fraudulent, that I manufactured it to circumvent the trust clause, that it's not a real marriage. Claire's jaw tightened. He's going to argue that a relationship that produces a marriage license within hours of the deadline can't possibly be legitimate. But we have a story. We built a timeline. We built a story last night, Daniel. We need evidence, history, proof that we've actually been together. She pulled up a calendar on her screen. We said we've been seeing each other for 6 months. That means we need documentation, credit card receipts from dinners together, photos, text message history, anything that shows a relationship developing over time. Daniel felt the problem like a physical weight. We don't have any of that because it didn't happen. Then we need to create the appearance of it, carefully, legally. Claire was already typing, her mind working at the speed that probably made her a terrifying negotiator. We can't fabricate evidence, but we can start building it now. Going forward, we need to look like a couple who's been married long enough that people believe it. How do we do that? Claire looked up at him, and for the first time since she'd knocked on his door, she looked uncertain. We act like we're married. We're seen together. We attend events together. You move into my house, or I move in here. We create the reality that matches the paperwork. The words hung between them, and Daniel understood what she was really saying. Their arrangement couldn't exist on paper alone. They had to live it. I can't move, he said. Emma's school is here. Her friends are here. This house is all she knows. Then I'll move here. Claire said it like it was simple, like she wasn't talking about a CEO moving into a 1,500 square foot house in a neighborhood where people fixed their own cars in the driveway. Claire, your house is probably 10 times the size of mine. And it's empty. It's a showpiece, not a home. If we're selling the image that I married you because I fell in love with you, it makes sense that I'd want to be where you are, where your daughter is, where real life happens. Daniel wanted to argue, but he couldn't find the logic to counter her. She was right. A wife who kept her mansion while her husband struggled in a modest house would raise more questions than it answered. The spare room is tiny, he warned. I've slept in worse. You have? Claire's smile was brief and sad. Boarding school, college dorms, the office couch during the hostile takeover attempt in 2023. I'll survive. They spent the rest of Saturday making it real. Claire went to her house and came back with more clothes, personal items, the kind of things that would make it look like she actually lived in Daniel's house. They rearranged the spare room together, and Daniel found himself noticing small things about her. She organized her books by color, not title. She kept her jewelry in a wooden box that looked handmade, clearly old and precious. She had a photo in a frame that she set carefully on the small nightstand, a woman who looked like an older version of Claire, smiling at the camera. Your mother? Daniel asked. Yes, taken about a month before she died. Claire touched the frame lightly. I was 11, brain aneurysm. One day she was fine, the next day she was gone. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. But the way she said it suggested that some losses didn't diminish with time, they just became part of the architecture you built your life around. That evening, Claire hired a photographer. Someone discreet, she assured him, someone who understood that some photos needed to look casual and spontaneous even when they weren't. They took pictures in Daniel's living room, in the kitchen, outside in the small backyard where Emma had a swing set. Claire stood close to him, smiled like she was happy, touched his arm with a familiarity that felt rehearsed at first, but gradually became less awkward. The photographer, a woman named Sarah Chen, who turned out to be Tommy's wife, was professional and kind. She didn't ask questions about the obvious staging, just adjusted lighting and angles and made suggestions. Put your hand on her waist, she told Daniel, like you've done it 1,000 times before. Daniel did, feeling the warmth of Claire's body through her shirt, and tried not to think about how long it had been since he'd touched another person like this. Good. Now, Claire, lean into him a bit, like you trust him to hold you up. Claire shifted her weight, and Daniel automatically tightened his grip to support her. Something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or just the acknowledgement that they were both in too deep to turn back now. On Sunday, they went to church together. Daniel hadn't been in months, not since Emma had stopped asking to go, but Claire pointed out that married couples in small towns went to church together. They sat in the back pew of St. Michael's, Emma between them, and Daniel felt the weight of eyes on them. People noticed. People always noticed when something changed. After the service, Margaret Foster, the town's most dedicated gossip and coincidentally the woman who ran the church's community outreach program, approached them with a smile that was equal parts friendly and predatory. "Daniel Brooks, as I live and breathe. And who is this lovely lady?" "Margaret, this is Claire Monroe. The word stuck in his throat for a half second. "My wife." Margaret's eyes widened with the delight of someone who'd just stumbled onto front-page news. "Wife? Daniel, I had no idea you were seeing anyone." "We kept it quiet," Claire said smoothly, extending her hand. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Foster. Daniel's told me about your work with the food bank." "Oh, he has?" Margaret shook Claire's hand, her mind clearly racing through implications and gossip angles. "Well, this is just wonderful. When did you two get married?" "Friday," Daniel said. "Small ceremony. Just family." "Friday? My goodness, that was fast." Claire laughed, and it sounded genuine. "When you know, you know. We've been together for a while, but we didn't see the point in a big production. At our age, you appreciate simplicity." It was masterfully done. Claire had answered the question without really answering it, provided just enough information to satisfy without giving away anything that could be fact-checked. Margaret looked between them, clearly trying to find an angle that didn't fit. "Well, congratulations. I hope you'll both come to the parish potluck next month. We'd love to get to know you better, Claire." "We'd be happy to," Claire said. Walking back to the car, Emma between them holding both their hands, Daniel felt the unreality of it all crash over him again. 3 days ago, he'd been a struggling carpenter on the edge of financial ruin. Now he was walking out of church with a wife and fielding questions from neighbors who wanted to know how this had happened so fast. "That went well," Claire murmured once they were in the car. "Margaret Foster will have told the entire town by dinner time." "Good. The more people who know, the more real it becomes." Claire checked her phone and her expression darkened. "The board meeting is tomorrow at 9 a.m. Richard's going to present his case for contesting the marriage." "What do we need to do?" "You need to be there, beside me, looking like a husband who's supporting his wife." She paused. "It's going to be hostile. Richard will try to provoke us, make us look unstable or desperate. You need to stay calm no matter what he says." Daniel thought about Emma, about the house, about everything riding on this performance. "I can do calm." That night, after Emma went to bed, Daniel and Claire sat at the kitchen table with the prenuptial agreement between them. John Martinez had reviewed it, approved it, but Daniel needed to actually sign it. Make this legally binding in every sense. "You're sure about this?" Claire asked as he picked up the pen. "Are you?" "I'm sure I don't have another option. I'm less sure I deserve your help." Daniel looked at her, really looked at her. 3 days, and she'd already become a fixture in his house. Her coffee cup beside his in the sink, her laptop on his kitchen table, her presence somehow filling spaces he hadn't realized were empty. "Maybe neither of us deserves this," he said. "Maybe we're just two desperate people who found each other at the right time." That's a depressing thought. Or maybe it's just honest. He signed the prenup. She signed it. They were bound now, legally and completely, in ways that felt both too simple and impossibly complex. Claire stood to leave for her actual bedroom, but paused at the doorway. "Daniel? The ring you gave me. Your wife's ring. I understand what that meant, what it cost you. I'll take care of it." "I know you will." After she left, Daniel sat alone in the kitchen and let himself feel the loss of that ring for the first time. Sarah's ring on another woman's finger. It should have felt like betrayal. Instead, it felt like the ring had found its purpose again, protecting something that mattered. Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. Daniel dressed in the only suit he owned, a dark gray one he'd worn to Sarah's funeral and hadn't touched since. Claire appeared in a black power suit that transformed her back into the CEO he'd first met, all sharp edges and controlled power. "Ready?" she asked. "No, but let's go anyway." The drive to Monroe Industries headquarters was silent. Daniel watched the landscape change from residential to commercial to the gleaming glass tower that housed Claire's company. The parking garage alone was bigger than his entire shop. "Stay close to me," Claire said as they rode the elevator to the 23rd floor. "Don't speak unless spoken to directly. Let me handle Richard." "I'm not a child, Claire." "I know, but this is my world, Daniel. I know how to fight in it." The boardroom was exactly what he'd expected. Massive table, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. 12 board members were already seated, men in expensive suits who looked at Daniel like they were trying to figure out what species he belonged to. At the head of the table sat Richard Monroe, and Daniel understood immediately why Claire was afraid of him. He had the same sharp intelligence as his stepsister, but where Claire's was tempered with something that resembled conscience, Richard's intelligence was purely predatory. "Claire," Richard said, standing, "how kind of you to join us, and you brought a guest?" "My husband," Claire said calmly. "Daniel Brooks. I believe you've heard we got married." "So the rumors are true." Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Congratulations on your sudden matrimony. Very convenient timing." "Convenient for whom?" "For you, obviously. Hours before the trust clause activated, almost like you manufactured a marriage to circumvent our father's wishes." Claire sat down, gestured for Daniel to take the seat beside her. "Our father's wishes were that I be married. I'm married. The clause is satisfied." "The clause requires a legitimate marriage, not a fraudulent arrangement designed to manipulate the terms of the trust." Richard opened a folder, pulled out documents. "I've done some research on your husband, Daniel Brooks, owner of a failing carpentry business. Multiple debts, facing foreclosure. Interesting that he suddenly married one of the wealthiest women in the state." Daniel felt anger rise in his chest, but Claire's hand found his under the table, squeezed once. A warning or a reassurance, he wasn't sure. "My business isn't failing," Daniel said quietly. "It's going through a difficult period. There's a difference." "Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you married Claire for her money." "I married Claire because I love her." The words came out easier than they should have, maybe because Daniel had spent 3 days rehearsing them, or maybe because some part of him wanted them to be true. "Her money doesn't interest me. I signed a prenup that gives me no claim to her assets." "How noble!" Richard's tone suggested the opposite. "And yet, I understand Claire has already hired your company for a substantial renovation project. Funny how love and financial benefits seem to coincide." "That's a separate business transaction," Claire cut in. "Daniel's work is excellent. I would have hired him regardless of our personal relationship." "Would you? Can you prove you've been in a relationship? Can you show me evidence of this great love story that culminated in a marriage license signed at—" Richard checked his notes. 11:07 p.m. on the last possible night? "We kept our relationship private," Claire said, "for obvious reasons. You would have used it against me." "How convenient that your privacy means there's no evidence to prove the relationship existed at all." One of the board members, an older man named Harrison, cleared his throat. "Richard does raise valid concerns, Claire. The timing is suspicious. If this marriage is fraudulent, we have a legal obligation to enforce the trust as written." "The marriage is legal," Claire said. "We have a valid license properly executed by an authorized officiant. The trust doesn't specify how long a courtship must last or what evidence must exist. It simply requires that I be married. I am. To a man none of us have met, who appeared out of nowhere at the exact moment you needed a husband." Richard leaned forward. "Claire, I'm asking the board to investigate this marriage, to hire an independent firm to determine whether it's legitimate or fraudulent. If it's found to be fraudulent, the trust should transfer as originally intended when you failed to meet the deadline." Daniel watched Claire's face, saw her running through calculations, weighing options. This was the moment she'd prepared for, the attack she'd known was coming. "Fine," she said. "Investigate. But while you're investigating, I remain CEO. The trust doesn't transfer until fraud is proven, and I guarantee you won't prove something that isn't true." "We'll see about that." Richard smiled. "I'm quite thorough." The meeting continued for another hour. Technical discussions about the investigation process, legal procedures, timelines. Daniel sat beside Claire, present but largely ignored. and he began to understand the role she needed him to play. Not a partner in her business, but proof of her legitimacy as a wife. A prop, essentially, but one that had to be convincing enough to withstand scrutiny. When they finally left the building, Claire's composure cracked slightly. She leaned against her car in the parking garage, and Daniel saw her hands shaking. "You did well in there," he said. "I bought us time, that's all." She looked up at him. "Richard's going to dig into everything, our backgrounds, our finances, our histories. He'll look for any inconsistency, any proof that we're lying." "Then we don't give him any." "Daniel, he's going to investigate how we met, when we started dating, where we've been together. He'll pull credit card records, phone records, everything. And he'll find nothing because there's nothing to find." Daniel thought about this, about the problem they'd created by building a marriage on paper instead of reality. "So we give him something to find. We start now, today. We create the relationship we claim to have. It's too late. He's already investigating the past 6 months. But he's investigating going forward, too. If we look like a real couple now, it makes the past more believable. If we're obviously faking it, everything falls apart." Daniel pulled out his phone. "We need to be seen together, a lot. We need to act like people who are actually married." Claire studied him. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we stop thinking of this as a performance for specific moments and start thinking of it as our actual life. You live in my house, really live there. We have dinner together. We're seen around town. We act like we're building a life together because that's what married people do." "You're talking about method acting our entire existence. I'm talking about making the lie true enough that it stops being a lie." Something shifted in Claire's expression, resistance giving way to acceptance. "Okay, we do this completely. No half measures." That evening, Claire came home from work, and Daniel realized with a start that he'd started thinking of his house as home for both of them, with Chinese takeout and a bottle of wine. Emma was delighted by the unexpected treat, and they ate at the coffee table in the living room, Emma chattering between them like this was normal. After Emma went to bed, Claire poured them both wine and sat on the couch beside Daniel, close enough that their shoulders touched. "To committed performances," she said, raising her glass. "To making it work," Daniel countered. They drank, and Daniel felt the strangeness of it, sitting on his couch with a woman who wasn't Sarah, pretending to build something real out of necessity and fear. "Tell me about your wife," Claire said quietly. "Your real wife, Sarah." Daniel's first instinct was to deflect, but he remembered what Claire had said about making this real. Real meant sharing the hard things. "She was a teacher," he said. "3rd grade. She loved kids, wanted a dozen of them. We only managed one before the cancer." He stared at his wine. "Ovarian. Aggressive. By the time they caught it, it was stage 4. She fought for 18 months. Emma was 4 when Sarah died." "I'm sorry." "Everyone's sorry. Sorry doesn't change anything." Daniel heard the bitterness in his voice, tried to soften it. "Sarah was the one who kept everything organized. Bills, schedules, client relationships. When she died, I realized I'd been coasting on her competence. I had no idea how to run a business and raise a kid alone." "But you're doing it." "I'm failing at it. That's why I agreed to this insanity." Claire was quiet for a moment. "My father died of a heart attack in his office. He was alone. They found him the next morning." She took a long drink. "He spent his entire life building that company, and he died surrounded by files and documents instead of people who loved him. I keep thinking about that. What it means to build something and lose yourself in the process. Is that what you're afraid of? Becoming him?" "I'm afraid of a lot of things. But yes, that's one of them." They sat in silence, 2 people bound by circumstance, sharing truths they probably wouldn't have shared otherwise. The wine disappeared slowly, and Daniel felt the walls between them becoming less solid. "This investigation Richard's launching," Daniel said. "What's the worst that can happen?" "Worst case? He proves fraud. The marriage is annulled. I lose the company. Richard runs it into the ground while extracting maximum value for himself. Hundreds of people lose their jobs. Everything my father built gets dismantled for parts. And what happens to me?" "You walk away." The prenup protects you. You keep your business, your house, everything. Claire looked at him. I designed it that way on purpose. Whatever happens to me, you're safe. What if I don't want to be safe? What if I want to see this through? Why would you? This isn't your fight, Daniel. It became my fight when I signed that license. He set down his wine glass. Besides, Emma asked me tonight why you're here so much. I told her you're someone important to me. I don't lie to my daughter if I can help it. Claire's eyes widened. You told her about us? I told her we're together. I didn't tell her about the arrangement. She doesn't need to know that part. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. But she needs to know you're going to be around. Otherwise, it's going to confuse her when she sees you at breakfast every morning. What did she say? She asked if you're going to be her new mom. I said no, nobody replaces her mom. But you might be someone else important in her life if that's okay with her. Daniel smiled slightly. She said you seem nice, but you don't know how to make chocolate chip pancakes the right way. I don't know how to make chocolate chip pancakes anyway. I'll teach you. That's what married people do, right? They teach each other things. Claire laughed, and it was the first genuine laugh Daniel had heard from her. I'm a terrible cook. Fair warning. Good thing I'm not. The conversation drifted into easier territory after that. They talked about Emma's school, about the workshop renovation Daniel had been planning, about Claire's ongoing battle with the board members who thought women should smile more and demand less. The wine bottle emptied, and Daniel found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years. When Claire finally stood to go to her room, she swayed slightly. Daniel caught her elbow, steadied her. I'm not drunk, she said. Just tired. I know. She looked down at their hands, at the ring on her finger that had belonged to another woman, another life. Thank you, Daniel, for all of this. For being kind when you could have been calculating. Thank you for hiring me when you could have found someone easier. Claire smiled, squeezed his hand once, then disappeared into the spare room. Daniel sat alone in his living room, listening to the house settle around him, and wondered when exactly this arrangement had started to feel less like a business deal and more like something he couldn't quite name. The investigation began in earnest on Tuesday. Richard hired a private firm that specialized in fraud detection, and they went to work with the efficiency of people who got paid to destroy other people's stories. Daniel's phone records were subpoenaed, his credit card statements, bank accounts, everything. Claire's attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Delgado, called them Tuesday evening with an update. They're being thorough, she said. They've requested documentation of every interaction you've had in the past year. Texts, emails, receipts, photos, anything that proves you've been in contact. We have some photos, Claire said. She had Daniel on speaker, both of them sitting at the kitchen table like this had become their war room. From this weekend. Recent photos aren't enough. They need to see a progression, a relationship developing over time. Daniel and Claire looked at each other, and Daniel saw his own frustration reflected in her face. What about the work contracts? Daniel asked. I did work for her before. That's documented. That helps establish prior contact, but it doesn't prove a romantic relationship. Richard's going to argue you were just a contractor she used to manufacture a fake history. After the call ended, Claire put her head in her hands. This is impossible. We can't create 6 months of history that doesn't exist. No, Daniel agreed. But we can live the next 6 months so convincingly that people question whether the investigation is even necessary. What do you mean? I mean, we become the couple everyone expects to see. We're at the diner on Friday nights. We go to Emma's school events together. We show up at town functions. We make ourselves so visible and so normal that Richard starts looking paranoid for questioning it. Claire lifted her head, considering. Social proof. If enough people believe we're real, it becomes harder to prove we're not. Exactly. It became their strategy. Every evening that week, Claire came home from work and they had dinner together, the three of them. She learned how Emma liked her grilled cheese cut diagonally, not straight across. She discovered that Daniel listened to old jazz while he worked in the shop. They developed rhythms and routines that started as performance but gradually became habit. On Friday night, they went to Rosie's diner, the same diner where they'd gotten married, though they sat in the main restaurant, not the office above it. Emma ordered pancakes for dinner because she could, because her father was in a good enough mood to say yes. Claire ordered a burger and actually ate it, something Daniel noticed she didn't do often. Margaret Foster was there, of course, because Margaret was always at Rosie's on Friday nights. She stopped by their booth with her husband, Frank. "Daniel, Claire, how lovely to see you both," Margaret said, her eyes cataloging every detail. "And Emma, sweetheart, how are you?" "Good. Claire's teaching me chess." "Is she now?" Margaret looked at Claire with new interest. "Do you play much chess, Claire?" "I played competitively in college," Claire said. "Emma's a quick learner." "Well, isn't that nice? You know, Frank and I were just saying how wonderful it is to see Daniel happy again. After everything with Sarah, we worried he'd never find someone." Daniel felt the words like a slap, but Claire's hand found his under the table, squeezed gently. "Sarah was irreplaceable," Claire said quietly. "I'm not trying to replace her. I'm just grateful Daniel gave me a chance to be part of his life." It was the perfect answer, acknowledging Sarah without competing with her memory. Margaret actually looked touched. "Well, you're good for him," Margaret said. "We can all see that." After Margaret left, Emma excused herself to go look at the dessert case, leaving Daniel and Claire alone. "I'm sorry," Claire said, "about Margaret bringing up Sarah. That must have been hard." "It's okay. People knew her. They're going to mention her." Daniel looked at Claire, at this woman who'd been a stranger a week ago and now sat across from him eating diner burgers and pretending to be his wife. "What you said was kind. Thank you." "I meant it. I'm not trying to erase her." "I know." They drove home in comfortable silence, Emma falling asleep in the back seat. Daniel carried her inside, tucked her into bed, and came back downstairs to find Claire had made tea and was sitting on the couch with her laptop. "Working?" he asked. "Checking email. Richard sent another message to the board. He's pushing for accelerated investigation timelines." "Of course he is." Daniel sat beside her, close enough to see her screen. She was reading a message that was professionally worded but fundamentally hostile, Richard questioning every aspect of their marriage. "He's not going to stop," Claire said quietly. "Even if the investigation finds nothing, he'll keep looking for angles. Then we keep living our lives. Eventually he'll have to accept it." "You don't know Richard. He doesn't accept anything he doesn't control." They sat together, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. And then, without really thinking about it, Daniel put his arm around Claire's shoulders. She stiffened for just a moment, then relaxed into him, her head resting against his shoulder. "Is this okay?" he asked. "Yeah," she said softly. "It's okay." They sat like that until Claire's laptop battery died and the house grew quiet around them. Two people pretending to be married, finding comfort in the pretense because the real world was too exhausting to face alone. And if it felt real for a moment, if Daniel's heart beat a little faster when Claire's breath evened out against his chest, he told himself it was just the stress. Just the performance becoming so convincing that even they were starting to believe it. Nothing more than that. It couldn't be. The investigation intensified over the following weeks, but so did the reality of their arrangement. Daniel found himself waking up to the smell of coffee Claire had already brewed, stumbling downstairs to find her at the kitchen table with her laptop and 3 different phones, dressed in suits that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage payment. She'd learned to navigate his kitchen, knew where he kept the sugar, and which mug was Emma's favorite. Small details that shouldn't have mattered, but somehow did. It was a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks into their marriage, when the first real crack appeared in their carefully constructed facade. Daniel was in the workshop behind the house, working on a custom bookshelf for a client, when Claire appeared in the doorway. She never came to the workshop during work hours. The fact that she was here, in the middle of the day, meant something was wrong. "Richard's escalating," she said without preamble. She held her phone like it was evidence at a crime scene. "He's filed a formal petition with the court to have our marriage annulled on grounds of fraud." Daniel set down his sander, wiping sawdust from his hands. "Can he do that?" "He can file it. Whether it succeeds depends on what the investigation finds." Claire's jaw was tight. "But the petition itself is public record. The media is going to find it. By tonight, this will be news." "How bad?" "Bad enough. Local CEO's suspicious marriage under investigation." That kind of headline. She met his eyes. "I'm sorry, Daniel. I didn't think he'd take it public this fast. Your name is going to be in the papers. People will talk. Emma might hear things at school. Daniel felt cold settle in his stomach. Emma. He'd been so focused on the practical aspects of their arrangement that he hadn't fully considered how public scrutiny would affect his daughter. I need to tell her, he said, before she hears it from someone else. Tell her what? The truth. Some version of it, anyway. Daniel pulled off his work gloves, his mind racing. She's 7, not stupid. She knows something's going on. Better she hears it from me than from Madison's mother, who heard it from Margaret Foster, who read it online. Claire nodded slowly. What are you going to say? I don't know yet, but I have to figure it out before she gets home from school. They walked back to the house together, and Daniel found himself grateful for Claire's presence. She didn't try to fix it or minimize it, just stood beside him while he made coffee he didn't want, and tried to figure out how to explain adult complications to a child who still believed the world was fundamentally fair. I could talk to her with you, Claire offered, if you think it would help. Daniel considered this. 3 weeks ago, Claire had been a stranger. Now she was offering to help him navigate one of the hardest conversations he'd have with his daughter. Yeah, he said. Yeah, that might help. They picked Emma up from school together, and if Emma thought it was strange that both of them were there, she didn't say so. She climbed into the back seat of Daniel's truck, chattering about the art project she'd finished, about how her friend Jordan had brought his new puppy to show and tell. At home, Daniel made hot chocolate the way Emma liked it, with extra marshmallows, and they sat at the kitchen table, the 3 of them. Emma looked between them, and her smile faded. Am I in trouble? She asked. No, baby, not at all. Daniel reached across the table, squeezed her hand. Claire and I need to tell you something that might seem confusing. Emma's eyes went wide. Are you breaking up? Is Claire leaving? The panic in her voice surprised Daniel. In 3 weeks, Emma had gotten attached. He should have seen it coming. No, Claire said quickly. I'm not leaving. But some people are saying things about your dad and me that aren't true, and we wanted you to hear the real story from us. What kind of things? Daniel took a breath. You know how I told you Claire and I got married? Yeah, you said it happened fast because sometimes grown-ups just know. That's true. But some people think we got married too fast. They're asking questions about whether we really love each other or whether we got married for other reasons. Emma frowned, processing this. But you do love each other, right? The question hung in the air like something fragile. Daniel looked at Claire, saw her measuring her response. Your dad and I care about each other very much, Claire said carefully. We got married because we wanted to be together. But some people don't believe that because it happened quickly. Who cares what other people think? Emma said with the straightforward logic of childhood. Sometimes we have to care, Daniel said, because these people are saying things that might end up in the news or online. You might hear kids at school talking about it. I wanted you to know the truth so it doesn't scare you if you hear something. Emma was quiet for a long moment, her hot chocolate cooling in front of her. Are you guys in trouble? We're handling it, Claire said, but it might be confusing for a while. If anyone asks you questions about your dad and me, you can tell them it's private family business. You don't have to explain anything to anyone. Not even Madison? If you want to talk to Madison, that's okay. But you don't have to answer questions from adults who are just being nosy. Emma nodded seriously, like Claire had just given her a mission. I can do that. I'm good at not telling nosy people things. Despite everything, Daniel smiled. Yes, you are. That evening, after Emma went to bed, the story broke online. Daniel sat on the couch with Claire, watching their names scroll across his laptop screen. Monroe Industries CEO's marriage under scrutiny. Fraud investigation targets recent wedding. The headlines were exactly as bad as Claire had predicted. I'm sorry, Claire said for the 3rd time that evening. Stop apologizing. We knew this could happen. Knowing it intellectually and seeing your name dragged through the internet are different things. Daniel couldn't argue with that. He closed the laptop, set it aside. What happens now? Now Richard tries to win in the court of public opinion while the legal investigation continues. He'll leak information, plant stories, make us look desperate and fraudulent. Claire's hands clenched in her lap. And we keep living our lives, keep being visible, keep acting like none of it matters. Does it matter? The court of public opinion? Sometimes. If the board thinks the scandal is damaging the company's reputation, they might pressure me to step down voluntarily. Would you? Claire looked at him, and her eyes were hard. I'd burn the building down before I'd hand it to Richard voluntarily. The ferocity in her voice reminded Daniel that he'd married a woman who'd spent her entire life fighting to be taken seriously. She wasn't going to surrender now. His phone buzzed. A text from Tommy Chen. Saw the news. You okay, man? Then another from Patricia Delgado. Don't talk to reporters. Forward any media requests directly to me. Then another from a number he didn't recognize. How much did she pay you to marry her? Daniel showed Claire the last one. She read it, her expression darkening. Block the number. They're fishing for quotes they can use. She pulled out her own phone, which was lighting up with similar messages. This is going to get worse before it gets better. She wasn't wrong. By morning, there were reporters parked outside Daniel's house. Not many, just 2, but enough to make leaving for work feel like running a gauntlet. Claire handled it with the practiced ease of someone who'd dealt with media before, keeping her head down, saying no comment without breaking stride. Daniel followed her lead, but he felt exposed in a way he never had before. At the workshop, he tried to focus on work, but his phone kept buzzing with messages. Some supportive, some hostile, some just curious. Margaret Foster called twice before he finally answered. Daniel, dear, I saw the news, she said, her voice dripping with concern that felt performative. Is it true? Did you and Claire really just get married to save her company? No, Margaret. We got married because we wanted to be together. But the timing was our business. I appreciate your concern, but Claire and I are fine. He hung up before she could press further, but he knew Margaret was already on the phone with someone else, spreading her version of the story. That evening, Daniel came home to find Claire in the kitchen with Emma, and both of them were covered in flour. Emma was giggling, and Claire had a streak of white across her cheek. What happened here? Daniel asked. We're making cookies, Emma announced proudly. Claire didn't know you're supposed to add the flour slowly, so it went everywhere. I'm learning, Claire said, and she was smiling. Actually smiling, not the controlled expression she wore for board meetings. Daniel joined them, helping salvage the cookie dough, and for an hour, the 3 of them existed in a bubble where investigative reporters and fraud accusations didn't exist. They were just a family making cookies, getting flour on the floor, laughing when the first batch came out too flat and had to be thrown away. When Emma went to wash up before bed, Claire turned to Daniel. Thank you. For what? For not making me feel like an intruder. For letting me be part of this. She gestured at the kitchen, the evidence of their baking disaster. I've never done this. Made cookies with a kid, had flour fights in someone's kitchen. My childhood was boarding schools and formal dinners. This is a mess? Nice, this is nice. Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something he hadn't noticed before. Loneliness. Claire Monroe, CEO, woman who commanded boardrooms and ran a multi-million-dollar company, was lonely. You can have this whenever you want, he said quietly. You live here now. This is your home too. Something shifted in Claire's expression, vulnerable and uncertain. Is it? Yeah, it is. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Daniel didn't want to name. Then Emma called for Claire to come read her bedtime story, and the moment broke. But it didn't disappear. It lingered, like smoke after a fire, coloring everything that came after. The investigation dragged on through October into November. Richard's legal team interviewed anyone who'd had contact with Daniel or Claire in the past year. They pulled phone records that showed exactly 3 calls between them before their marriage, all related to the conference table contract. They found no romantic emails, no love letters, no evidence of a relationship developing over time. This is actually good news, Patricia Delgado told them during a conference call. The lack of electronic trail can be explained by your desire for privacy. What they're not finding is evidence of fraud. No payments from Claire to Daniel before the marriage. No suspicious transfers. The renovation contracts are all legitimate market rate agreements. So we're winning? Daniel asked. We're not losing. There's a difference. Patricia's voice was cautious. But Richard's attorneys are now arguing that the absence of evidence is itself evidence. They're claiming you were so careful to hide the fraud that you left no trace. That's circular logic, Claire said sharply. It is, but it's the argument they're making. After the call, Claire threw her phone onto the couch with more force than necessary. This is insane. We're being investigated for being too clean. What do they want? A trail of incriminating evidence? They want proof we're lying because Richard wants me gone. She stood, paced the length of the living room. And the longer this drags on, the more damage it does to the company. Stock prices are down. 2 major clients have delayed contract renewals. The board is getting nervous. What can we do? Claire stopped pacing, turned to face him. There's a charity gala next week. The Riverside Foundation annual dinner. It's the biggest social event of the year. Everyone who matters will be there, including the entire board and Richard. You want us to go. I want us to go and look so convincingly married that Richard's accusations start sounding paranoid. She moved closer to him. Can you do that? Can you stand in front of 500 people and pretend to be my husband? Daniel thought about everything at stake. His house, Emma's stability, Claire's company, all of it balanced on their ability to sell a lie. Yes, he said, I can do that. The week before the gala, Claire took Daniel shopping for a proper tuxedo. He protested that his suit was fine, but Claire insisted that fine wasn't good enough. These people judge everything, she said as they entered a men's clothing store Daniel had never noticed before. Your shoes, your watch, the cut of your jacket. If you show up looking like you bought your tux off the rack, they'll use it as evidence that we're from different worlds. We are from different worlds, which is fine for a genuine relationship. But if we're trying to convince people this isn't a marriage of convenience, we need to look like we belong together. She chose a tuxedo for him with the efficiency of someone who knew exactly what she was looking for. Classic black, perfectly tailored, expensive enough to signal he belonged at the event, but not so flashy that he'd look like he was trying too hard. When Daniel emerged from the dressing room, Claire studied him with an appraising eye. Turn around, she said. He did, feeling self-conscious. The fit is good. You clean up well, Mr. Brooks. Is that a compliment? It's an observation, but she was smiling slightly. You're going to need to learn to dance. What? There's always dancing at the gala. If we don't dance together, people will notice. Daniel hadn't danced since his wedding to Sarah. The thought of it now, with Claire, in front of hundreds of people, made his chest tight. I'm not much of a dancer, he said. Neither am I, but we'll manage. Claire paid for the tuxedo before Daniel could even see the price tag. Consider it a business expense. That evening, after Emma went to bed, Claire pulled up a video of ballroom dancing basics on her laptop. We're really doing this? Daniel asked. Unless you want to stand awkwardly in the corner all night. They cleared space in the living room, moving the coffee table aside. Claire pulled up a slow waltz, and they stood facing each other in the space where Emma usually did her homework. Okay, Claire said, consulting the video. You put your right hand on my waist. I put my left hand on your shoulder. We hold our other hands like this. She demonstrated, and Daniel followed, acutely aware of how close they were standing. He could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive. Now we just move, Claire said, and they started swaying awkwardly to the music from her laptop speakers. They were terrible at it. Daniel stepped on her foot twice in the first minute. Claire couldn't figure out which way to turn. They kept losing the rhythm and having to start over. But they kept trying. And somewhere around the fourth song, something clicked. They found a rhythm that worked, their bodies learning to anticipate each other's movements. Daniel's hand on Claire's waist became less tentative. Claire's head came to rest naturally against his shoulder. This isn't so bad, she murmured. No, Daniel agreed. It's not. They danced through 3 more songs before Claire finally pulled away, her cheeks flushed. That should be enough, she said. We won't win any competitions, but we won't embarrass ourselves either. That night, lying in bed, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about how Claire had felt in his arms, how right it had felt despite everything. He told himself it was just the practice, the repetition making something artificial feel natural. But part of him knew he was lying to himself. The night of the gala arrived with the weight of everything unsaid. Claire spent the afternoon getting ready while Daniel picked Emma up from school and took her to stay overnight with Tommy and Sarah Chen. Emma had been excited about a sleepover, but she'd hugged Daniel extra tight before he left. You and Claire look pretty tonight, okay? Emma had said. Show everyone you're really married. We will, baby. When Daniel returned home, Claire was standing in the living room in a dress that made him forget how to breathe. It was deep blue, elegant and understated, with a neckline that was modest but somehow devastating. Her hair was up, showing the line of her neck. She wore the ring he'd given her, Sarah's ring, and somehow that made everything feel more real. "You look beautiful," he said, and meant it. "You clean up well yourself." Claire's eyes moved over him in the tuxedo. "Ready for this?" "No. But let's go anyway." The gala was held at the Riverside Grand Hotel, a historic building downtown that Daniel had driven past 1,000 times, but never entered. They pulled up in Claire's Mercedes, and valets in white gloves opened their doors. Camera flashes went off, paparazzi hoping for scandal, probably. Daniel offered Claire his arm, and she took it, pressing close to him. "Smile," she murmured, "like you're happy to be here." They walked into the hotel together, and Daniel felt the eyes on them immediately. The entire room seemed to turn, conversations pausing as people assessed them. He recognized some faces from news articles, business leaders, politicians, society figures, people who lived in a different stratosphere than a carpenter from the suburbs. Richard was there, of course, standing near the bar with a woman Daniel didn't recognize. He watched them enter with a smile that was all edges. "Showtime," Claire whispered, and then she was pulling Daniel deeper into the room, introducing him to people whose names he'd never remember. "This is my husband, Daniel Brooks," she said over and over, and each time Daniel saw people trying to reconcile the CEO with the carpenter, looking for the angle they couldn't quite see. Harrison, the board member who'd questioned them at the meeting, approached with his wife. "Claire, how lovely to see you, and this must be the mysterious husband." "Not so mysterious," Daniel said, shaking his hand. "Just private." "Indeed. Tell me, Mr. Brooks, how does a carpenter find himself married to one of the most powerful women in the state?" It was a trap disguised as small talk. Daniel felt Claire tense beside him. "The same way anyone finds themselves married," Daniel said evenly. "We met. We talked. We fell in love. The details are ours, not anyone else's." "Very diplomatic. Claire's taught you well." "Claire didn't teach me anything except how to be myself around someone who accepts me for who I am." Harrison's wife smiled at that, and Daniel saw approval in her eyes. Claire's hand found his, squeezed gently. They navigated the room together, a united front against curiosity and suspicion. Daniel told the same story a dozen different ways. They'd met through work, kept their relationship private, got married when the time felt right. It was exhausting and nerve-wracking, but Claire never left his side, her presence a constant anchor. Dinner was served at round tables with white tablecloths and more silverware than Daniel knew what to do with. They were seated with board members and their spouses, and the conversation was polite but probing. Everyone wanted to know about their relationship, their plans, their future. Claire handled most of the questions, but she kept bringing Daniel into the conversation, touching his arm, smiling at him like they shared secrets. The performance was flawless. After dinner, the dancing began. The band played something slow and romantic, and couples filled the dance floor. Daniel felt his stomach drop. "Dance with me," Claire said, standing and offering her hand. They moved to the dance floor, and Daniel pulled Claire into the position they'd practiced. The music swelled around them, and they began to move together, finding the rhythm they'd discovered in his living room. "Everyone's watching," Claire murmured. "I know." "Richard looks like he wants to murder us." "Good." Claire laughed quietly, and Daniel pulled her closer, until there was almost no space between them. They moved together across the floor, and Daniel forgot about the audience, forgot about the investigation, forgot about everything except the woman in his arms. Her head rested against his shoulder, just like in practice. His hand on her waist felt like it belonged there. When she looked up at him, her eyes were soft in a way he'd never seen before. "Daniel," she said quietly. "Yeah? This doesn't feel like pretending anymore." Her words hit him like a physical force because she was right. Standing here, holding her, moving to music under chandeliers, none of it felt like acting. It felt real in a way that terrified him. "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." The music swelled, and Daniel made a decision. He leaned down, giving Claire time to pull away if she wanted to, and kissed her. Not for the audience, not for Richard, or the board, or the investigation. For himself. For her. For whatever this had become. Claire's hands came up to his face, and she kissed him back with an intensity that made the rest of the room disappear. When they finally pulled apart, Daniel saw something in her eyes that matched what he was feeling, fear and exhilaration, and the dawning realization that they'd crossed a line they couldn't uncross. The song ended. The room erupted in polite applause. Daniel and Claire stood on the dance floor, still holding each other, while the weight of what they'd just done settled over them. Richard appeared at their side, his expression controlled but fury burning in his eyes. "Quite the performance," he said. "It's not a performance," Claire said, her voice steady. "Isn't it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like two people desperately trying to convince everyone there's something they're not. You can believe whatever you want, Richard. The truth is the truth regardless of your opinion." "We'll see about that." Richard leaned in closer, lowering his voice so only they could hear. "I have new evidence. The notary who married you, Tommy Chen? He's filed statements about your late-night ceremony, about how rushed it was, about how it looked suspicious even to him." Daniel felt Claire's hand tighten in his. "Tommy wouldn't he? For the right incentive?" Richard smiled. "The investigation is about to take a very interesting turn. Enjoy your evening, Claire. It might be your last as CEO." He walked away, leaving them standing on the dance floor while couples swirled around them. "He's bluffing," Daniel said. "Maybe. Or maybe he's already gotten to Tommy." Claire's face was pale. "We need to leave. Now!" They made their excuses and left the gala, the evening that had started as a victory turning to ash. In the car, Claire pulled out her phone and called Patricia Delgado. "Richard claims he has new evidence from our notary," she said when Patricia answered. "Can he use testimony about how the ceremony looked to discredit the marriage?" Patricia's response took several minutes. When Claire hung up, her expression was grim. "She says witness testimony about the circumstances of our marriage can be used as supporting evidence of fraud. If Tommy testifies that we seemed desperate or that the ceremony felt rushed and inauthentic, combined with the timing and the lack of prior relationship evidence, it could be enough to convince a judge to annul the marriage. Tommy wouldn't do that to me. Not willingly, maybe. But Richard's very good at finding pressure points." They drove home in silence, the kiss they'd shared at the gala feeling like something from another lifetime. When they pulled into the driveway, Daniel saw a manila envelope wedged into his front door. He retrieved it, opened it in the car. Inside was a single document, a court filing. "Motion to annul marriage on grounds of fraud," Claire read over his shoulder. "Hearing scheduled for 2 weeks from today." Daniel stared at the paperwork, at the legal language that was designed to destroy everything they'd built. So he's forcing it to court. He's not leaving this to the investigation anymore. He's going nuclear. Claire's hands were shaking. "If we lose this hearing, the marriage is annulled. The trust transfers to Richard. I lose everything. Then we don't lose." "Daniel, you heard what Patricia said. They have circumstantial evidence. They have the rush timeline. Now they might have Tommy's testimony. What do we have?" Daniel looked at her, at this woman who'd knocked on his door 5 weeks ago and changed his entire life. He thought about Emma asking if Claire was leaving, about Claire covered in flour laughing in his kitchen, about dancing with her tonight and feeling something shift in his chest. "We have the truth," he said. "What truth? That we got married to save my company?" "No. The truth that somewhere along the way this stopped being fake." Daniel turned to face her fully. "Claire, when I kissed you tonight, it wasn't for the cameras. It wasn't for Richard or the board. It was because I wanted to. Because standing there with you felt right in a way nothing has felt right in 3 years. Claire stared at him, and he saw tears gathering in her eyes. "Daniel, I'm not saying this to complicate things. I'm saying it because if we're going into court to defend this marriage, I need you to know that I'm not defending a lie anymore. I'm defending something real." A tear slipped down Claire's cheek. "This is crazy. We barely know each other." "I know you take your coffee black. I know you read mysteries before bed. I know you're terrible at cooking, but you try anyway because Emma asked you to. I know you're lonely and scared and trying so hard to be strong that you forget it's okay to let someone help you." Daniel reached across the console, wiped away her tear. Maybe that's not enough to build a life on, but it's more than we had 5 weeks ago. If we lose in court, everything falls apart. Then we make sure we don't lose. Claire leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. I don't know how to do this. How to let someone in. How to trust that they won't leave. Neither do I. But maybe we figure it out together. They sat in the car for a long time, holding each other in the darkness. Two people who'd started as strangers and were becoming something neither of them had planned for. When they finally went inside, the house felt different. Not like a place Daniel was sharing out of necessity, but like a home they were building together. Claire went to the spare room to change, but when she came back out in sleep clothes, she didn't go back to her room. She sat beside Daniel on the couch, curled against him like she belonged there. 2 weeks until the hearing, she said quietly. 2 weeks to prepare. What if it's not enough? Then we'll deal with it, together. Claire lifted her head to look at him. When did you become an optimist? About 5 minutes ago. I'm trying it out. She smiled, real and unguarded, and Daniel felt his heart do something complicated in his chest. This woman had upended his entire world, and somehow that felt like the best thing that had happened to him in years. They fell asleep on the couch, still in their formal clothes from the gala, Claire's head on Daniel's shoulder and his arm around her waist. And if it felt dangerous and reckless and absolutely terrifying, it also felt inevitable. Like they'd been moving toward this moment since the night she'd knocked on his door. Like everything else had just been prologue to whatever came next. Morning came too soon, sunlight streaming through the living room windows where Daniel and Claire had fallen asleep tangled together on the couch. Daniel woke first, his neck stiff from the awkward angle, and found Claire still pressed against him, her face peaceful in sleep in a way it never was when she was awake. He stayed still, not wanting to disturb her, and tried to reconcile the woman in his arms with the CEO who'd walked into the gala last night like she owned the world. Claire stirred, her eyes opening slowly. For a moment she looked confused, then memory settled in and something vulnerable crossed her face. We fell asleep, she said unnecessarily. Yeah. I drooled on your tuxedo shirt. Daniel looked down at the small wet spot on his shoulder. It'll survive. They sat up, putting careful distance between them, and the awkwardness of the morning after settled in. Except this wasn't really a morning after because nothing had actually happened beyond a kiss at the gala and falling asleep holding each other. But it felt significant anyway, like they'd crossed into territory neither of them knew how to navigate. I should go pick up Emma, Daniel said, checking his phone. It was barely 7 in the morning. I'll make coffee, Claire offered, standing and smoothing her rumpled dress. She looked beautiful and disheveled, and Daniel had to force himself to look away. By the time he returned with Emma an hour later, Claire had changed into jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back, looking less like the woman from last night and more like someone who belonged in his kitchen, making pancakes. Emma ran to her immediately, chattering about the sleepover and the movie they'd watched, and Claire listened with an attention that made Daniel's chest tight. This was what he'd been afraid of. Not the investigation or Richard's accusations, but this. Emma getting attached to someone who might disappear when their arrangement ended. Except now Daniel wasn't sure their arrangement had an end date anymore. Not after last night. Not after admitting that what he felt for Claire had evolved past pretense into something real and terrifying. Patricia Delgado called that afternoon while Emma was watching cartoons. Daniel and Claire took the call in the kitchen, speakerphone between them like a referee. I've reviewed Richard's new filing, Patricia said, her voice tense. He's claiming the marriage certificate was improperly executed because it was filed after business hours. He's arguing that Tommy Chen, as the notary, didn't have authority to perform marriages after the courthouse closed. That's ridiculous, Claire said. Tommy is licensed to perform marriages at any time. The courthouse hours are irrelevant. Normally, yes. But Richard's attorneys found an obscure provision in state law about emergency marriages. They're claiming that because you filed after hours, it should have been classified as an emergency marriage, which requires additional documentation proving the emergency circumstances. Daniel felt cold settle in his stomach. What happens if they're right? If the judge agrees with their interpretation, the marriage could be invalidated on a technicality. You'd need to remarry properly to satisfy the trust clause, but by then the deadline would have passed. This is insane, Claire said, her voice sharp. They're twisting the law to manufacture a loophole that doesn't exist. They're being creative and aggressive. Patricia paused. There's something else. Richard has subpoenaed Tommy Chen to testify at the hearing. Whatever he said in those statements Richard mentioned, we need to know what we're dealing with. After the call, Claire stood at the sink, staring out at nothing, her shoulders rigid with tension. Daniel moved behind her, close but not touching. We need to talk to Tommy, he said. What if Richard got to him? What if he's going to testify against us? Tommy's my friend. He wouldn't sell me out. Everyone has a price, Daniel. Richard is very good at finding it. But Daniel shook his head. Not Tommy. Let me call him. Tommy answered on the third ring, his voice cautious. Danny, I wondered when you'd call. Richard's people talked to you. Yeah, they talked to me. Tommy sighed heavily. Look, man, I'm sorry. They showed up at my office with a subpoena and a lot of questions about your wedding. I answered truthfully because I'm under oath, but I didn't tell them anything that would hurt you. What did you tell them? That you called me late that night asking for an emergency ceremony. That you both seemed stressed but determined. That the whole thing took maybe 10 minutes. Tommy paused. I also told them that I've known you for 15 years, that you're the most honest person I know, and that if you married Claire, it was because you wanted to, not because someone paid you to. Relief flooded through Daniel. So you're on our side. I'm on the side of truth, and the truth is you're my friend and I trust your judgment. But Danny, I have to testify to what I saw. The rushed ceremony, the late hour, all of it. Richard's lawyers are going to use my testimony to make it look suspicious. I know, but at least you're not lying about us. After he hung up, Claire looked at him with something like hope. He's not going to sabotage us? No, he'll tell the truth. We just have to hope the truth is enough. The next week was a blur of preparation. Patricia had them write detailed affidavits about their relationship, their decision to marry, their life together since the wedding. Daniel found himself documenting small moments he hadn't realized he'd been collecting. The first time Claire had laughed at one of his jokes, the way she'd stayed up all night with Emma when she had the flu, the evening they'd spent in the workshop while he taught her how to sand wood properly. These details matter, Patricia told them during a prep session. The court isn't just looking at the timeline. They're looking at whether this is a real marriage. You need to show them the relationship, not just the paperwork. How do we prove what we feel? Claire asked. You be honest. You tell them your story, and you make them believe it. 3 days before the hearing, Daniel came home from the workshop to find Claire sitting at the kitchen table with her head in her hands. Financial reports were spread around her laptop, and she looked like she'd been crying. What's wrong? He asked immediately. The company lost another major contract today, our third this month. Her voice was hollow. The scandal is killing us. Clients don't want to be associated with Monroe Industries while the CEO is under investigation for marriage fraud. Stock prices dropped another 6 points. Daniel sat beside her, pulled her against him. She came willingly, burying her face in his shoulder. Even if we win the hearing, the damage might be irreversible, she said, her words muffled. Richard's destroying everything while we fight about whether our marriage is real. Then we win fast and we win decisively. We make it so clear that there's no fraud that the clients come back. You make it sound simple. It is simple. We tell the truth. We're married. We care about each other. Everything else is just noise. Claire pulled back to look at him, her eyes red. When did you become so sure about this? I'm not sure about anything, but I'm sure about you, about us. That has to count for something. She kissed him then, soft and desperate, and Daniel kissed her back like he could pour all his certainty into her, through touch alone. When they pulled apart, Claire's breathing was unsteady. I'm scared, she admitted. I'm scared we're going to lose everything. The company, this... She gestured between them. All of it. Then we fight like hell to keep it. Emma appeared in the doorway, her expression worried. Are you guys okay? Claire wiped her eyes quickly, shifting into a smile that almost looked real. We're fine, sweetheart. Just talking about grown-up stuff. The trial thing? Daniel and Claire exchanged a glance. They'd tried to shield Emma from the details, but she was perceptive. Yeah, Daniel said. The trial thing. But it's going to be okay. Emma came over, climbed into Claire's lap like it was the most natural thing in the world. If the judge asks me, I'll tell him you're really married. I can tell because Dad smiles more now, and you make him happy. Claire's arms tightened around Emma, and Daniel saw fresh tears gathering in her eyes. Thank you, baby, she whispered. That night, after Emma went to bed, Claire didn't retreat to the spare room. She stayed with Daniel, and they talked until nearly midnight about everything and nothing. About Sarah and Claire's mother and the parents they'd both lost. About fear and hope and the weight of responsibility. About what would happen if they lost and what would happen if they won. If the court annuls the marriage, Claire said quietly, the arrangement ends, the contracts, all of it. You'd get to walk away clean. Is that what you want? For me to walk away? No, but I'd understand if you did. She turned to face him fully. Daniel, you didn't sign up for this level of chaos. You agreed to help me save my company. You didn't agree to have your entire life scrutinized and your name dragged through the media. You're right. I didn't agree to that. Daniel took her hand, laced their fingers together. I agreed to marry you, to stand beside you, to make it look real enough that the board would believe it. But somewhere along the way, it became real. And I don't walk away from real. Even if real is complicated and messy? Especially then. The night before the hearing, Daniel couldn't sleep. He stood in Emma's doorway watching her sleep, thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. If they lost, if the marriage was annulled, Claire would lose Monroe Industries. The renovation contracts would likely be canceled. The financial stability he'd found would disappear. But worse than that, he'd lose Claire. She'd leave, because that was the agreement. When it was over, they walked away clean. Except he didn't want clean anymore. He wanted complicated and messy and real. He felt Claire's presence before he heard her, turned to find her standing behind him in the hallway. Couldn't sleep either? She asked quietly. Too much in my head. They stood together in the darkness, and Claire slipped her hand into his. Whatever happens tomorrow, we're going to win. But if we don't, Claire. Daniel turned to her, cupped her face in his hands. We're going to win, and then we're going to figure out what this is, what we are. No more pretending, no more arrangements. Just us, being honest about what we want. What if what we want is impossible? Nothing about this has been possible from the start. Why start being realistic now? She laughed shakily, and Daniel kissed her, slow and thorough, trying to memorize the taste of her in case tomorrow changed everything. Morning came with clear skies and cold November air. Daniel dressed in his court suit while Claire put on a tailored navy dress that was professional and understated. They'd agreed to leave Emma with the Chens again, not wanting her anywhere near the courthouse. The goodbye with Emma was harder than Daniel expected. She hugged them both, made them promise to come back soon, and told Claire she looked pretty. Simple, innocent words that hit like a sledgehammer because they revealed how much Emma had come to depend on Claire's presence. The courthouse was downtown, an imposing building of granite and glass. Patricia met them outside, her expression grim. Richard's here with his full legal team, she said. He's putting everything into this. But remember, we just need to show that your marriage is legitimate. The burden of proof is on them to prove fraud. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than Daniel expected, wood paneling and fluorescent lights that made everything look harsh. Richard sat at the opposing table with 3 attorneys, and when he saw Claire and Daniel enter together, his expression was pure satisfaction. He thinks he's already won, Claire murmured. Let him think that. The Judge Catherine Morrison presided, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and a reputation for not tolerating nonsense. She called the proceedings to order and looked at both tables with the expression of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. This is a hearing to determine the validity of a marriage license issued to Claire Monroe and Daniel Brooks, she said. Mr. Pierce, you're claiming the marriage is fraudulent. Present your case. Richard's lead attorney, a man named Gerald Pierce, who looked like he'd been born in a 3-piece suit, stood smoothly. Your Honor, we'll demonstrate that this marriage is a sham created solely to circumvent the terms of a family trust. The evidence will show that Miss Monroe and Mr. Brooks had minimal contact before their marriage, that the ceremony was conducted in suspicious circumstances, and that the entire arrangement was designed to allow Ms. Monroe to maintain control of Monroe Industries despite failing to meet the trust requirements. He called his first witness, Tommy Chen. Tommy looked uncomfortable in his suit, kept glancing at Daniel with apologetic eyes. Under oath, he described the late-night phone call, the rushed ceremony above the diner, the way both Daniel and Claire had seemed stressed and urgent. "Would you say they appeared to be a couple in love?" Pierce asked. Tommy hesitated. "They appeared to be people who knew what they wanted. Whether that was love, I can't say for certain." "Did anything about the ceremony strike you as unusual?" "The timing was unusual. The location was unusual. But the commitment seemed genuine." "Seemed, Mr. Chen, or was?" "I'm not a mind reader. I can only tell you what I observed." Pierce tried to push harder, but Tommy held firm. Yes, it was rushed. Yes, it was late. But no, he didn't see evidence of coercion or fraud. Just two people getting married quickly, which happened all the time. When Patricia cross-examined, she got Tommy to confirm that he'd known Daniel for 15 years, that Daniel was honest and trustworthy, that in Tommy's opinion, Daniel wouldn't participate in fraud. Next, Pierce called a forensic accountant who'd analyzed Claire and Daniel's financial records. The accountant testified that there were no payments from Claire to Daniel before the marriage, but noted that Claire's company had subsequently hired Daniel's business for a substantial renovation project. "Isn't it convenient," Pierce said, "that immediately after marrying Miss Monroe, Mr. Brooks received lucrative contracts from her company?" "The contracts are dated after the marriage, yes," the accountant confirmed. Suggesting that the marriage was a transaction, Mr. Brooks provides the appearance of legitimacy. Ms. Monroe provides financial benefit. Patricia objected. "Speculation, Your Honor. The witness is here to testify about financial records, not motivations." "Sustained," Judge Morrison said. "Mr. Pierce, stick to facts." The accountant couldn't provide evidence of fraud because there wasn't any. The contracts were legitimate, market rate, properly documented. If anything, the clean financial picture worked in their favor. Pierce's final witness was a private investigator who had been tracking Daniel and Claire for the past month. He testified about seeing them together frequently, attending Emma's school events, grocery shopping, acting like a married couple. "But you also noted," Pierce said, "that prior to 1 month ago, there was no evidence of them being together at all. No restaurant receipts, no hotel stays, no photographs, nothing to suggest a relationship existed." "That's correct," the investigator said. "The relationship appears to have materialized suddenly after the marriage license was filed." Or, Pierce said triumphantly, "the relationship was manufactured after the marriage to create the appearance of legitimacy." When it was their turn, Patricia called Daniel to the stand. His heart hammered as he swore to tell the truth, knowing that everything hinged on making the judge believe him. Patricia walked him through the story they'd built, meeting Claire through the conference table contract, conversations that developed into friendship, attraction that grew over time. She asked about his decision to marry Claire, about his feelings for her, about their life together. Daniel answered honestly, drawing on the real emotions that had developed over the past 6 weeks. He talked about Emma's acceptance of Claire, about quiet dinners and shared responsibilities, about learning to trust someone new after losing Sarah. "Mr. Brooks," Patricia said, "did Claire Monroe pay you to marry her?" "No." "Did she offer you any financial incentive to participate in a fraudulent marriage?" "No, she offered me legitimate work contracts for services my business provides." "That's how business works." "Why did you marry her?" Daniel looked at Claire, sitting at the table watching him with her heart in her eyes. "Because she needed help, and I was in a position to provide it. And because the more time I spent with her, the more I realized I wanted to help her, not out of obligation, but because I cared about her." "Do you love her?" The question hung in the air. Daniel could feel Richard watching him, waiting for him to stumble. "Yes," Daniel said simply. "I love her." Pierce's cross-examination was brutal. He hammered at the timeline, the lack of prior evidence, the convenient nature of the marriage happening hours before the trust deadline. He tried to paint Daniel as a desperate man who'd sold himself to a desperate woman. "Isn't it true, Mr. Brooks, that you were facing foreclosure when you married Ms. Monroe?" "I was having financial difficulties, yes." "And those difficulties disappeared after the marriage?" "I secured legitimate work contracts. I'm working to pay off my debts. Nothing disappeared. I'm earning what I'm owed. How convenient that Ms. Monroe was there to save you. She didn't save me. She hired me. There's a difference. Pierce tried to rattle him, but Daniel held steady. Years of raising Emma alone, of navigating loss and financial stress, had taught him how to stay calm under pressure. When Claire took the stand, she was composed and direct. She testified about her father's death, the trust clause, her initial panic when she realized time was running out. She admitted to approaching Daniel because she needed help, but insisted that what developed between them was real. Ms. Monroe, Pierce said during cross-examination, you're asking this court to believe that you fell in love with a carpenter in a matter of weeks and married him hours before losing your company. That's quite a romance novel. I'm not asking you to believe in love at first sight, Claire said calmly. I'm asking you to believe that two adults made a choice to be together, and that choice was genuine regardless of the timing. But the timing is everything, isn't it? If you'd had more time, would you have married Mr. Brooks? I don't know. I can't answer hypotheticals about a timeline that doesn't exist. But you can answer this. If the trust clause didn't exist, if you weren't about to lose your company, would you have married Daniel Brooks? Claire was silent for a long moment, and Daniel felt his heart stop. This was the question that could destroy everything. If she said no, it proved Richard's case. If she said yes, it would sound like a lie. I can't separate who I am from the circumstances of my life, Claire said finally. The trust clause exists. My father died. I was facing a deadline. Those things are part of my reality. But I can tell you that when I asked Daniel to marry me, I chose him specifically because I trusted him. And trust, in my experience, is harder to find than love. What we've built since then, the life we're living, the way we've learned to depend on each other, that's real. The circumstances that brought us together don't change the fact that we chose to stay together. It was a good answer, honest and thoughtful. But Daniel couldn't read Judge Morrison's expression. The closing arguments were exactly what Daniel expected. Pierce painted them as desperate people who'd manufactured a marriage of convenience. Patricia argued that the marriage was legal regardless of motivation, and that there was no evidence of fraud. Your Honor, Patricia said in conclusion, love isn't quantifiable. Relationships don't follow prescribed timelines. My clients may have married quickly, but quick doesn't mean fraudulent. They've built a life together. They're raising Mr. Brooks's daughter together. They've integrated their lives in ways that go far beyond a simple business transaction. The petitioner hasn't proven fraud. He's proven that he doesn't like the way his stepsister chose to meet the trust requirements. That's not grounds for annulment. Judge Morrison called a recess to review the evidence and arguments. Daniel and Claire sat in a small conference room with Patricia, not speaking, just waiting. The minutes stretched into hours. Finally, they were called back into the courtroom. Judge Morrison looked tired but resolute. I've reviewed all evidence and testimony, she said. This is an unusual case. The timing is certainly suspicious. However, suspicion is not the same as proof. Mr. Pierce has presented circumstantial evidence that the marriage was convenient, but he has not provided clear evidence of fraud. The marriage license was properly executed by an authorized official. The relationship, while perhaps unconventional in its development, appears to be genuine based on the testimony and evidence presented. Daniel felt Claire's hand find his under the table, squeezing hard. The motion to annul is denied, Judge Morrison said. The marriage between Claire Monroe and Daniel Brooks is legally valid. This hearing is concluded. The gavel came down, and it was over. Richard's expression was pure fury. He stood abruptly, his attorneys trying to calm him, but he was beyond listening. He looked at Claire across the courtroom, and Daniel saw something dangerous in his eyes. This isn't over, Richard said, loud enough for everyone to hear. You might have fooled the judge, but I know what you are, and I'll prove it. Mr. Monroe, Judge Morrison said sharply, you will respect this court's decision or find yourself in contempt. The ruling stands. Richard stormed out, his legal team following. Daniel and Claire sat frozen, not quite believing it was real. You won, Patricia said, allowing herself a small smile. The marriage is valid. The trust stays with Claire. They left the courthouse into bright afternoon sunlight. Reporters were waiting, cameras flashing, shouting questions. Claire stopped on the courthouse steps, and Daniel stood beside her as she addressed them with the poise of someone who'd been doing this her entire life. The court has confirmed what I've known all along. My marriage to Daniel Brooks is legitimate and legal. I'm grateful for the judge's fair ruling, and I look forward to continuing to lead Monroe Industries into the future. Thank you. She took Daniel's hand and they walked to her car through the crowd of cameras and questions, presenting a united front. But once they were inside with the doors closed, Claire's composure cracked. She put her face in her hands and started shaking. "Hey," Daniel said gently. "We won. It's okay." "I know, She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "I thought we were going to lose. When Pierce asked me if I'd have married you without the trust clause, I thought that was it. I thought I'd ruined everything." "You didn't. You were perfect." "I lied, though, on the stand, when he asked if I'd have married you without the deadline." Daniel's heart clenched. "What do you mean?" "I said I couldn't separate my circumstances from my choices, which is true. But the real answer is yes. I would have married you anyway. Maybe not that fast, maybe not that soon, but eventually, yes. Because you're—" her voice broke. "You're the first person in years who's made me feel like I'm more than the company, more than my father's legacy. You see me, Daniel, really see me. And that's terrifying and wonderful, and I don't know what to do with it." Daniel pulled her across the console, held her while she cried, and felt something settle in his chest, something that felt like coming home. "Let's go get Emma," he said quietly. "Let's go home." They picked up Emma from the Chens, and she threw herself at both of them with the kind of enthusiasm only children could manage. On the drive back, she talked non-stop about her day, about the game she'd played with Sarah Chen, about the picture she'd drawn for Claire. At home, they ordered pizza and watched a movie Emma picked. And for a few hours, they existed in a bubble where legal hearings and fraud accusations didn't exist. They were just a family, imperfect and unconventional, but real. After Emma went to bed, Daniel and Claire sat on the couch, and Claire looked at him with serious eyes. "We need to talk about what happens now," she said. "What do you mean?" "The arrangement, the original agreement. We were supposed to stay married for 6 months to a year, then divorce quietly. But after today, after what I said in the car," she took a shaky breath. "I don't want that anymore. I don't want to pretend this has an expiration date." "Neither do I. But we should be smart about this. We should take time to figure out if what we feel is real or just adrenaline from fighting together." Daniel took her hands in his. "Claire, I've spent 6 weeks watching you become part of my life, part of Emma's life. I've seen you at your worst and your best. I've seen you vulnerable and strong and scared and brave. I don't need more time to know that I want you here, that I want this to be real, not just legally, but actually. What if it doesn't work? What if we're better at fighting external battles than building an actual relationship? Then we'll figure it out. But I'd rather fail at something real than succeed at something fake." Claire kissed him, and it felt different from the kiss at the gala. Less desperate, more certain. When she pulled back, she was smiling through tears. "Okay," she said. "Okay. We do this for real. No more arrangements, no more contracts. Just us figuring out how to build something that lasts." "Just us," Daniel agreed. They sat together in the quiet house, holding each other, and Daniel thought about how his life had changed in 6 weeks. From struggling carpenter to husband, to a woman who terrified and amazed him in equal measure. From financial ruin to stability. From loneliness to something that felt dangerously close to happiness. It wasn't the life he'd planned. It wasn't even a life he could have imagined 6 weeks ago. But sitting here with Claire in his arms, knowing Emma was safe upstairs, knowing they'd fought together and won together, Daniel thought maybe the best things in life were the ones you never saw coming. The morning after the hearing, Daniel woke to find Claire's side of the bed empty. They'd fallen asleep together on the couch again, but sometime during the night they'd moved to his bedroom, a silent acknowledgement that the spare room arrangement was over. He found her in the kitchen, already dressed for work, staring at her phone with an expression that made his stomach drop. "What's wrong?" he asked. She looked up, and he saw fear in her eyes. The board called an emergency meeting. Richards convinced 3 members to support a vote of no confidence. They're trying to remove me as CEO despite the court ruling. Can they do that? If they have enough votes, yes. The court said the marriage is valid, which means I met the trust requirements. But the board can still remove me for other reasons: loss of investor confidence, damage to the company's reputation, anything they can frame as failure of leadership. Claire's hands were shaking. The hearing yesterday was just the legal battle. This is the political one, and Richard's been working the board members for weeks. Daniel moved to her, took the phone from her hands, and set it down. When's the meeting? This afternoon, 2 o'clock. She looked up at him. I could lose everything anyway. The court ruling might not matter if the board votes me out. Then we make sure they don't vote you out. How? Richard has 3 guaranteed votes. I need at least 7 to keep my position. I have 4 members who are loyal to me, but the other 5 are undecided. They're scared of the scandal, worried about their own positions. Daniel thought about this, about the men he'd met at the gala who'd looked at him like he was a curiosity. What do they want? The undecided ones? Stability. Confidence that the company won't implode from negative press. Claire rubbed her face tiredly. They want to believe that I can lead Monroe Industries through this crisis, but Richard spent weeks planting doubts. So we give them confidence. We show them that you're not going anywhere, that the marriage isn't a scandal to hide but a strength to build on. Daniel pulled out his phone. I have an idea, but you have to trust me. What kind of idea? The kind where I stop being the quiet husband in the background and start actually helping you fight. 2 hours later, Daniel sat in Patricia Delgado's office with Claire beside him and a plan that was either brilliant or insane. You want to hold a press conference, Patricia said slowly, where you publicly address the marriage and the investigation before the board meeting. Yes, Daniel said. Richard's been controlling the narrative. He's made this about scandal and fraud. We take that power away by being completely transparent. That's risky, very risky. If you say the wrong thing, you could make everything worse. Or we could make it better. Claire leaned forward. Daniel's right. We've been defensive this entire time, reacting to Richard's moves. We need to take control of the story. Patricia studied them both, then nodded slowly. Okay. We do it at noon, before the board meeting. I'll set it up at Monroe Industries headquarters. But you need to be prepared. The press is going to ask hard questions. Let them ask, Daniel said. The press conference was held in the lobby of Monroe Industries, cameras and reporters packed into a space that suddenly felt too small. Daniel stood beside Claire at a podium, aware of every eye on them, every camera recording. His heart hammered, but Claire's hand found his, squeezed once, and he steadied. Claire spoke first, her voice clear and strong. Thank you all for coming. I know there's been significant speculation about my marriage to Daniel Brooks and the circumstances surrounding it. I'm here today to address those concerns directly and honestly. She detailed the timeline without apology: her father's death, the trust clause, her decision to marry Daniel. She acknowledged the rushed nature of their wedding, but emphasized the legitimacy of their relationship. I won't pretend this was a conventional romance, Claire said. But I also won't apologize for making a choice that was both personally and professionally necessary. My father's trust required me to be married. I chose to marry someone I trusted, someone I respected, someone who treated me like a person rather than a prize to be won. Then she stepped aside, and Daniel took the microphone. He'd never spoken in front of cameras before, never imagined he'd be standing in a corporate lobby defending his marriage to hundreds of people. But he thought about Emma, about the life they were building, and he found his voice. My name is Daniel Brooks. 6 weeks ago, Claire Monroe came to my house and asked me to marry her. I said yes because I needed the financial stability her business could provide. That's true, and I'm not going to hide it. He saw reporters lean forward, sensing scandal. But what's also true is that over the past 6 weeks, I've gotten to know an extraordinary woman, someone who works 16-hour days and still makes time to help my 7-year-old daughter with her homework. Someone who's brilliant and driven and scared and lonely, just like the rest of us. He looked at Claire, saw tears gathering in her eyes. People want to know if we're really married or if this is some elaborate fraud. Here's the truth. We're really married. We signed the papers. We live together. We're building a life together. Does that life look exactly like a traditional marriage? No. But it's real. And it's ours. And I'm not going to stand here and apologize for finding something worth fighting for. The questions came fast and hard after that. Reporters asking about the money, the timing, the investigation. Daniel and Claire answered them together, tag-teaming responses, presenting a united front that was impossible to ignore. "Mr. Brooks, do you love your wife?" one reporter called out. Daniel didn't hesitate. "Yes, I love her. I didn't plan to. I didn't expect to. But I do." "Miss Monroe, do you love your husband?" Claire looked at Daniel and her smile was soft and genuine. "Yes, completely." The press conference lasted 40 minutes. When it was over, social media was already exploding with clips and commentary. Some people thought it was romantic, some thought it was a calculated PR move, but the narrative had shifted. They weren't hiding anymore, weren't running from accusations. They were standing together and daring anyone to prove them wrong. At 1:30 p.m., Claire and Daniel arrived at the Monroe Industries boardroom, the same room where this had all begun, where Richard had first challenged the marriage. Patricia was already there, looking grimly satisfied. "The press conference worked," she said quietly. "I've had 3 calls from board members who saw it. They're impressed by the transparency." "Enough to vote with me?" Claire asked. "We'll find out." The board members filed in, taking their seats around the massive walnut table Daniel had built. He noticed several of them looking at the table with new appreciation, like they were seeing his work differently now that they knew the man behind it. Richard was last to arrive, and his expression was thunderous. "Well," he said as he sat down, "that was quite the performance this afternoon, Claire." "It wasn't a performance, it was the truth. The truth is you manufactured a marriage to circumvent Father's wishes. Father's wishes were that I be married. I'm married. The court confirmed it yesterday. This meeting is about whether the board has confidence in my leadership, not about my personal life." Harrison, the oldest board member, cleared his throat. "Claire, Richard has raised concerns about the company's reputation. Stock prices are down. We've lost contracts. Clients are nervous. How do you plan to address this?" Claire stood, and Daniel saw her shift into CEO mode. Confident, commanding, unshakable. "The stock prices will recover when we demonstrate stability. The contracts will come back when we show clients that Monroe Industries is stronger than ever. I've already secured 2 new major contracts this week that will more than replace what we lost. The press conference this afternoon was about transparency and control, 2 things this company was built on." She pulled up a presentation on the screen, detailed financial projections and strategic plans. For the next 20 minutes, she walked the board through her vision for the company's future, addressing every concern with data and strategy. Daniel watched her command the room and felt something close to awe. This was Claire in her element, brilliant and fierce and absolutely certain of her worth. When she finished, Richard tried to counter with his own presentation about leadership instability and reputational damage, but it felt weak compared to Claire's concrete plans. The board members were clearly swaying. "I move for a vote," Richard said finally, his voice tight. "All in favor of removing Claire Monroe as CEO, say aye." 3 hands went up, Richard and his 2 loyal supporters. "All opposed?" 9 hands rose, including 3 of the previously undecided members. Richard's face went white. He'd lost, and he knew it. "The motion fails," Harrison said. "Claire Monroe remains CEO of Monroe Industries." Richard stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He looked at Claire with pure hatred. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Claire said quietly. "The court validated my marriage. The board confirmed my position. You've lost, Richard. Accept it with grace or leave without it, but either way, it's over." For a moment, Daniel thought Richard might actually explode. His fists clenched, his jaw tight, his entire body vibrating with rage. Then he turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him hard enough to rattle the windows. The remaining board members sat in uncomfortable silence until Harrison spoke. "Claire, we owe you an apology. Richard's accusations made us doubt your judgment, and we should have had more faith in your leadership." "Thank you, Harrison. I appreciate that. For what it's worth, I saw the press conference. You and your husband were honest and dignified. That matters." He looked at Daniel. "And Mr. Brooks, this table you built is extraordinary. I'd like to commission one for my own office." Other board members chimed in with similar sentiments, and Daniel found himself taking business cards and discussing projects. It was surreal. An hour ago, he'd been defending his marriage on camera. Now he was networking with CEOs. When they finally left the building, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Claire stopped on the sidewalk, turned to Daniel, and kissed him hard enough that he forgot they were standing in public. "We did it," she said when they pulled apart. "We actually did it." "You did it. I just stood there and looked supportive." "You were perfect. Everything about this was perfect." She laughed, high and slightly unhinged. "I can't believe Richard walked out. Did you see his face?" "Hard to miss." They drove home in Claire's Mercedes, and the reality of what had happened started to sink in. The crisis was over. The marriage was validated. Claire's position was secure. They'd won every battle they'd been fighting. "So what now?" Daniel asked as they pulled into the driveway. Claire looked at the house. His house? Their house. And smiled. "Now we figure out how to actually be married. Not for the board or the court or the media, just for us." They picked up Emma from school together, and she immediately sensed the change in mood. "You guys are happy," she observed. "Did something good happen?" "Yeah, baby," Daniel said. "Something really good happened. Everything's going to be okay now." That evening, Claire made an announcement over dinner. "I've been thinking about this house," she said, looking around at the modest kitchen with its aging appliances and flickering light. "It's wonderful and full of love, but it's also small and needs work. What would you think about renovating it? Really renovating it? New kitchen, fix the electrical, maybe add on a master suite?" "That's expensive," Daniel said carefully. "I know, but I have resources, and this is my home now. Our home. I want it to reflect that." She looked at Emma. "What do you think, Emma? Should we make the house bigger and better?" Emma's eyes went wide. "Could I get a bigger room with space for all my art supplies?" "Absolutely. And your dad could finally get that workshop expansion he's been dreaming about." Daniel felt emotion rise in his throat. "Claire, you don't have to." "I want to. Not as your boss or the person who hired your company, as your wife who wants to build a real home with you." She reached across the table, took his hand. "Let me do this. Let me invest in our future." He nodded, not trusting his voice. Emma was already making plans, talking about paint colors and where her bed would go, and Claire listened with genuine interest, making suggestions and asking questions. Later that night, after Emma had gone to bed still chattering about her future bedroom, Daniel and Claire sat on the back porch looking at the stars. It was cold, November air biting, but they sat close together, sharing warmth. "I need to tell you something," Claire said quietly. "About the arrangement, the original one." Daniel tensed. "Okay." "When I came here that first night, I had already decided that if you said yes, I would honor the agreement completely. 6 months, a year, however long it took to make it look legitimate. Then we'd divorce, and I'd pay you for the inconvenience." She paused. "I had my attorney draw up a payment plan, $50,000, to be transferred when we divorced. Compensation for your trouble." "Claire, let me finish. I never gave you that agreement because somewhere between asking you to marry me and actually marrying you, I realized I didn't want it to be a transaction. I wanted it to be real, even though I was terrified of what that meant." She turned to face him. "So I destroyed the payment plan. I tore it up because I couldn't ask you to love me and also treat you like an employee I was paying off." Daniel absorbed this, understood what she was saying. "You were protecting yourself." "I was. But I was also protecting you. From me. From my world. From all the ways I could hurt you." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "And then you gave me your wife's ring, and I knew I was in trouble. Because that ring meant something. It meant trust and faith, and the belief that I wouldn't throw away something precious." "You didn't throw it away. You're still wearing it." Claire looked down at her hand, at Sarah's ring catching starlight. "I never want to take it off. Is that okay? I know it was hers, and I don't want to—" "It's yours now," Daniel said firmly. "Sarah would want it on the hand of someone who loves me and Emma, someone who makes us happy. You do that, Claire. You make us happy." She kissed him, soft and sweet, and Daniel thought about how far they'd come from that desperate midnight knock on his door. How what started as a business arrangement had transformed into something neither of them had expected. "I want to adopt Emma," Claire said suddenly, pulling back. "Legally, I mean. I want to be her mother. Not to replace Sarah. No one could replace Sarah, but to be another parent who loves her and protects her." Daniel's heart stopped. "That's a big step." "I know, and if you're not ready, I understand. But I need you to know that I'm in this completely. Emma's not just your daughter, who I'm nice to. She's become my daughter too. I love her, Daniel. I love both of you, and I want our family to be official in every way that matters." Daniel thought about Emma asking if Claire was leaving, about the way his daughter had wrapped herself around Claire like a lifeline, about Claire teaching Emma to play chess and helping with homework, and staying up all night when Emma had the flu, about the 1,000 small ways Claire had become essential to their lives. "I think Emma would like that," he said. "And so would I."